January 14th, 2019, Cedar Rapids, United States. There's a moment, and if you've ever experienced true horror, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a moment when the world tilts. When something so wrong enters your life that your brain simply refuses to process it. Your hands go numb. Your heartbeat becomes a drum inside your skull. And everything you thought you understood about safety, about justice, about the basic rules of human decency, it all shatters like ice on concrete. For the Hartwell family, that moment arrived in a plain white envelope. Picture this with me. It's a gray January afternoon in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The kind of day where the sky hangs low and colorless, where the cold doesn't bite so much as it seeps, into your bones, into your walls, into the silence of a house that used to echo with a teenage girl's laughter but now feels like a mausoleum. Karen Hartwell, 43 years old, a woman who hasn't slept more than 3 consecutive hours since October, shuffles to the mailbox at the end of her driveway. She's wearing her dead daughter's oversized hoodie. She hasn't taken it off in days. The neighbors have noticed. They don't say anything. The mailbox creaks open. Bills. A catalog no one will read. A sympathy card from someone in Michigan she doesn't remember. And then, an envelope. No return address. Her name and address handwritten in neat, almost mechanical block letters. The paper is crisp, white, ordinary. The kind you'd buy in a 100-pack from any office supply store. There is nothing remarkable about it. And yet Karen's hand freezes. Something primal, some ancient alarm system buried deep in the human brainstem, tells her not to open it. Tells her to drop it. To burn it. To pretend it never arrived. She opens it anyway. Inside is a single sheet of paper. Folded once. The same block handwriting. And as Karen's eyes move across the words, the gray January sky seems to press down on her shoulders like a physical weight. The note contains a detail about her daughter's final moments. A specific detail. Something about the position of Emily's hands. Something the police deliberately withheld from every press release, every news report, every public statement. Something only 2 groups of people could possibly know. The investigators who found the body, and the person who put it there. And then, at the bottom of the page, a single line. She begged. Did you know that? She begged. And I laughed. The scream that tears from Karen Hartwell's throat brings her husband running from the house. It brings her 12-year-old son Tyler to the front window, where he freezes, watching his mother crumple to her knees on the frozen driveway, the white paper fluttering from her grip like a dying bird. David Hartwell reaches his wife, reads the note over her shoulder, and something in his face, something fundamental, simply breaks. Someone didn't just murder their daughter. Someone is enjoying it. Now, I need you to understand something before we go any further. The story I'm about to tell you is not simply a story about a murder. It's not even a story about a murderer. It's something far more disturbing than that. This is the story of a 14-year-old boy who believed, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that he was the smartest person in any room he entered. A boy who planned a murder the way other kids plan science fair projects. A boy who killed a 16-year-old girl named Emily Hartwell not in a fit of rage, not in a moment of madness, but because she politely declined to sit next to him at a school assembly. And his ego simply could not tolerate the rejection. But here's what makes this case unlike anything you've heard before. Getting away with murder wasn't enough for him. He needed everyone to know how clever he was. He needed the family of his victim to understand that they were insects, and he was something greater. So he taunted them. Again and again. Anonymous messages filled with details only the killer could know. Cruel provocations designed to twist the knife of their grief. He attended their daughter's vigils. He created memorial pages in her honor. He posted tearful tributes online while secretly laughing at every comment, every prayer, every desperate plea for justice. He thought his youth made him untouchable. He thought his intelligence made him invisible. He thought he had constructed the perfect crime and was now free to dance on its grave forever. He was wrong. I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Because here's the thing about arrogance. Here's the thing about narcissism so profound it blinds you to your own vulnerability. Every taunt was a breadcrumb. Every message was a fingerprint. Every public appearance at a vigil, every crocodile tear posted to social media, every moment this boy spent feeding on the suffering he'd caused. It was all evidence. He just couldn't see it. He was so busy admiring his own reflection that he never noticed the net tightening around him. The investigators assigned to Emily's case were experienced, patient, methodical. And they had one advantage the killer never anticipated: they understood him. They recognized the psychology of a narcissist who couldn't resist the spotlight, who needed an audience for his cruelty, who would inevitably, make a mistake born from his own overconfidence. And when he finally made that mistake, it wasn't even close. The boy who thought he was untouchable was exposed, arrested, tried as an adult, and sentenced to spend the rest of his youth and the entirety of his middle age behind bars. The genius who believed he was playing chess while everyone else played checkers discovered that the game had rules he never understood. Rules like forensic linguistics, metadata analysis, and the simple human truth that evil, no matter how clever, eventually reveals itself. Over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through every detail of this case. You'll meet Emily Hartwell, not as a victim, but as the vibrant, kind-hearted young woman whose life was stolen. You'll understand the twisted psychology of her killer, how he became what he became, and why the warning signs were missed. You'll follow the investigation step by step, experience the heartbreaking false leads and the breakthrough moments, and watch as the walls close in on a predator who never believed anyone was smart enough to catch him. And in the end, you'll witness something that cases like this rarely provide: true justice. Complete justice. The kind of justice that doesn't just punish the guilty, but strips away every illusion they ever held about themselves. This is the story of Marcus Whitmore, the 14-year-old killer who taunted a grieving family. And the moment justice struck back. Before we go any further, before I take you deeper into the darkness of this case, I need you to meet someone. Not a victim. Not a statistic. Not a name on a police report or a photograph on a missing person flyer. A person. Because that's what gets lost, isn't it? In stories like this, we become so fixated on the monster that we forget to truly see the life that was stolen. We reduce vibrant, complex human beings to the worst moment of their existence. And I refuse to do that to Emily Hartwell. So let me take you back. Before the nightmare. Before October 15th. Before any of this. Let me show you who she actually was. Picture a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the kind of golden autumn day that makes you believe the world is fundamentally good. The Cedar Rapids Animal Shelter sits on the east side of town, a low concrete building that smells of disinfectant and dog food and unconditional love. And there, walking a three-legged pit bull named Chester down the gravel path behind the facility, is a 16-year-old girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. She's singing. Off-key. Terribly, enthusiastically off-key. Some pop song from the radio that she doesn't quite know the words to, so she's filling in the gaps with nonsense syllables, and Chester doesn't mind at all. His tail wags in time with her voice. The shelter staff watches from the window, smiling. Emily Hartwell has been volunteering here since she was 13. She comes every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. She's the one who convinced her parents to adopt their family cat. She's the one who cried for 2 days when a senior dog named Biscuit had to be put down, then came back the very next week because the animal still needed her. That was Emily. She felt things deeply: joy, sorrow, compassion, and she never apologized for it. At Jefferson High School, she existed in that rare social space reserved for people who are genuinely, effortlessly kind. She wasn't popular in the traditional sense. She wasn't a cheerleader or a prom queen or any of those high school archetypes. She was something better. She was the girl who sat with freshmen eating alone in the cafeteria. The girl who stayed after class to help struggling students with algebra, even though math wasn't even her best subject. The girl who remembered everyone's name, who asked about your sick grandmother, who made you feel seen in a world that so often makes teenagers feel invisible. Her laugh, God, her laugh. Her mother Karen would later describe it to investigators through tears, struggling to find the words. It was like, it could cure a bad day, she said. You'd hear Emily laugh from another room, and whatever was bothering you just lifted. The Hartwell family lived in a modest two-story colonial on Maple Street, the kind of house with a basketball hoop in the driveway and a vegetable garden in the backyard that never quite produced enough tomatoes. David Hartwell worked as a logistics manager for a regional trucking company. Long hours, steady paycheck, the quiet pride of a man who provided for his family. Karen worked part-time as a dental hygienist, arranging her schedule around her children's lives. And then there was Tyler, 12 years old, obsessed with video games and basketball and pretending he wasn't completely in awe of his older sister. The sibling dynamic was classic. Emily teased him mercilessly about his crush on a girl in his class. Tyler retaliated by eating the last of her favorite cereal, but beneath the surface was something deeper. When Tyler struggled with bullies in 6th grade, it was Emily who taught him how to stand up for himself. When their grandmother fell ill the previous spring, it was Emily who held Tyler's hand in the hospital waiting room and promised him everything would be okay. Their grandmother, Nana Rose, they called her, lived just 4 blocks away. She called Emily her sunshine girl. Said she was the spitting image of her own mother, who'd passed decades ago. Every Sunday, Emily walked over for lunch and listened to stories about the old days, about family history, about a world before cell phones and social media. She was the only teenager Nana Rose knew who actually seemed to enjoy those visits. This was the life Marcus Whitmore decided to end. Now, I want you to hold on to this image for a moment. Emily at the shelter, singing off-key to a 3-legged dog. Emily at the dinner table, making her little brother laugh. Emily walking to her grandmother's house on a Sunday afternoon, autumn leaves crunching beneath her sneakers. Hold on to that warmth. Because I need to show you something colder. It was late September, maybe 2 weeks before Emily vanished, when Jefferson High held an all-school assembly about college preparation. The auditorium was packed. Students crammed into rows, seniors in the back, freshmen near the front. Emily sat with her friends in the middle section, 3rd row from the aisle. And that's when she noticed him. A younger boy. 8th grade, by the look of him. He must have wandered over from the junior high for some reason. He was standing at the end of her row, looking at the empty seat beside her. Waiting. Oh, sorry, Emily said with her usual friendly smile. I'm saving that for my friend Rachel. The boy didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and something else. Something Emily didn't recognize and immediately dismissed. Then he smiled. A small, tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. No problem, he said. And he walked away. Emily turned back to her friends. She didn't think about the interaction again. Why would she? It was nothing. A random moment in a random day. She didn't notice that the boy found a seat 3 rows behind her. She didn't notice that he watched her for the entire assembly. And she certainly didn't notice that when she laughed at something Rachel whispered, that beautiful room-brightening laugh, the boy's expression didn't change at all. His eyes simply narrowed, like a scientist observing a specimen. No one thought twice about it. They should have. Now I need to take you somewhere uncomfortable. Because if we're going to understand what happened to Emily Hartwell, truly understand it, not just the what but the why, we have to step inside a mind that operates by rules most of us can't fathom. We have to look at a 14-year-old boy and see not the mask he constructed for the world, but the thing that lurked beneath it. And I want to warn you. What you're about to hear won't make sense. Not in the way you want it to. You're going to search for the trauma, the abuse, the broken home that explains everything. You're going to look for the moment when something went wrong, when a normal child was twisted into something else. You won't find it. And that's perhaps the most terrifying part of this entire story. Marcus Whitmore was born on March 3, 2004, at Mercy Medical Center in Cedar Rapids. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Healthy. Normal. His mother Linda, a former elementary school teacher who'd left her career to raise children, cried with joy when she held him for the first time. His father Richard, a traveling pharmaceutical sales representative, passed out cigars to his colleagues and bragged about his son for weeks. By all external measurements, Marcus had everything a child could need. The Whitmores lived in a comfortable 3-bedroom home on Oak Avenue, just 4 blocks from the Hartwell residence. Richard's job kept him on the road 3 weeks out of every month, but he compensated with expensive gifts and elaborate weekend outings when he was home. Linda devoted herself entirely to Marcus, her only child, after complications made a second pregnancy impossible. She read to him every night. She enrolled him in enrichment programs. She told everyone who would listen that her son was special. She was right, just not in the way she meant. Marcus learned to read at 4. By 6, he was testing at a 5th grade level. His elementary school teachers used words like gifted and exceptional. He was quiet in class but always had the right answer when called upon. He followed rules meticulously. He never caused trouble. Parent-teacher conferences were glowing affairs, and Linda would return home with a satisfied smile, convinced she was raising something extraordinary. But Linda noticed things. Small things. Things she told herself meant nothing. When Marcus was 5, she found him in the backyard, crouched over the family's garden. He was watching a beetle. Just watching it. For almost an hour. When she called him inside for lunch, he looked up at her with those sharp, intelligent eyes and said, "I wanted to see what would happen if I pulled its legs off. But I didn't. Because you would be upset." Linda laughed nervously. Children were curious. It was normal. When Marcus was 7, the neighbor's cat went missing. 3 days later, a maintenance worker found it in a drainage ditch 2 blocks away. Drowned. There was no evidence connecting Marcus to the incident. But Linda remembered how he'd complained about the cat digging in their yard. She remembered the flat expression on his face when the neighbors posted missing flyers. She remembered asking him if he'd seen the cat, and the way he'd tilted his head slightly, almost amused, before saying no. She never told anyone about that memory. Not even Richard. Especially not Richard. By middle school, Marcus had perfected his mask. He earned straight A's with minimal visible effort. He joined the debate team and quickly became its captain, excelling at the cold logic of argumentation, the strategic dismantling of opponents' positions. His teachers described him as mature beyond his years and exceptionally focused. He was polite to adults, using phrases like "yes, ma'am," and "thank you, sir," with mechanical precision. His peers found him harder to read. He didn't have close friends. Not really. He had associations. Strategic relationships with classmates who could be useful. He knew how to smile at the right moments, how to feign interest in conversations about sports or video games, how to perform the rituals of normal adolescent interaction. But something was always off. Other students sensed it without being able to articulate it. They described him as weird or intense, or simply kind of creepy. They included him in group projects but didn't invite him to parties. Marcus didn't care. He found his classmates tedious. Their concerns, crushes, social hierarchies, who said what about whom, struck him as pathetically small. He was operating on a different level. He knew it. And one day, he believed, everyone else would know it too. His journal, discovered by investigators months later, painted a picture that would chill even seasoned detectives. "I am not like them," he wrote at age 12. "I look at the other students and I see animals. They move through their days without thinking, without planning, without understanding anything. I see everything. I understand everything. Someday they will understand what I am." And later, at 13, "I've been reading about famous killers. The ones who got caught were stupid. Emotional. They made mistakes because they couldn't control themselves. I would never make those mistakes. I am in complete control. Always." The obsession with Emily Hartwell began in the spring of his 8th grade year. Marcus first noticed her at a school event, a combined junior high and high school assembly about community service. Emily was on stage, receiving an award for her volunteer work at the animal shelter. She was smiling, radiant, genuinely humble about the recognition. The audience applauded warmly. Marcus felt something shift inside him. She was everything the other students were not. Bright. Compelling. Worthy of his attention. He began researching her social media, her class schedule, her friend group, her family. He learned which route she walked to school. He knew her locker combination within 2 weeks. He memorized the rhythm of her days. In his journal, the entries changed. Emily Hartwell. She's different from the others. Special. I've decided she will be mine. She doesn't know it yet, but she will understand eventually. They always do. And then, 2 months before her death, she rejected me. At the assembly. I tried to sit next to her and she said the seat was taken. She didn't even look at me. She looked through me. Like I was nothing. Like I was one of them. She will learn. I will teach her. And then everyone will see. The thing about Marcus Whitmore, the thing that made him so dangerous, was that he didn't experience rejection the way most people do. For most of us, rejection stings. We feel hurt, embarrassed, maybe a little angry. And then we move on. We process. We heal. Marcus couldn't do that. His sense of self was so inflated, so entirely dependent on his belief in his own superiority, that Emily's polite dismissal registered as something close to an existential threat. She hadn't just declined to sit next to him. She had denied his significance. She had treated him as ordinary. And in Marcus's mind, that could not be allowed to stand. The plan began forming immediately. Not a fantasy. Not a vague idea. A plan. Methodical. Detailed. He researched forensic investigation techniques, learning what evidence to avoid leaving behind. He studied the geography of Cedar Rapids, identifying locations that would provide privacy and concealment. He timed Emily's walking routes, counting the seconds between streetlights. He spent 3 months preparing. And during those 3 months, he sat in his bedroom, looking out the window toward the Hartwell house 4 blocks away, and he smiled. Because no one suspected. No one saw. The mask was perfect. I need you to sit with that for a moment. A 14-year-old boy, living in a comfortable home with parents who loved him, attending a school where teachers praised his intelligence, walking through a community that saw nothing wrong, and inside his mind, a murder was taking shape. Not because of trauma. Not because of neglect, but because somewhere in the wiring of his brain, empathy simply never developed. Other people weren't real to him. They were objects, obstacles, toys. And Emily Hartwell had made the fatal mistake of making him feel small. She had no idea what was coming. None of them did. October 15th, 2018. I need you to remember that date. Write it down if you have to. Because everything, every moment of joy, every assumption of safety, every ordinary Tuesday ritual in the Hartwell household, ends on this night. And I'm going to walk you through it, minute by minute, because you need to understand exactly how quickly a life can be stolen. How a normal evening can curdle into nightmare. How a 16-year-old girl can leave her best friend's house with a smile on her face and simply vanish. Let me take you there. The afternoon of October 15th was unseasonably warm for Cedar Rapids. 62 degrees. A golden autumn sun hanging low over the trees. The kind of weather that makes you forget winter is coming. Emily Hartwell spent the day in her usual rhythm. School until 3:15. A quick stop at her locker to grab her volunteer jacket. Then her shift at the animal shelter until 6 o'clock, where she walked dogs, cleaned kennels, and bottle-fed a litter of orphan kittens that had arrived the week before. The shelter staff would later tell investigators that Emily seemed happy that day. Relaxed. She'd been talking about applying to the University of Iowa's veterinary program. She had her whole life planned out. At 6:30, Emily's mother Karen picked her up from the shelter and drove her home for a quick dinner. Leftover lasagna, eaten standing at the kitchen counter because Emily was running late. She was supposed to be at her best friend Rachel's house by 7 o'clock to work on a history project about the civil rights movement. Be home by 9, Karen said. It's a school night. Emily rolled her eyes the way teenagers do. I know, Mom. Text me when you're leaving Rachel's. I will. Karen would replay that conversation in her mind 10,000 times in the months that followed. The casual tone. The mundane instructions. The complete absence of any premonition that she was seeing her daughter for the last time. Emily grabbed her backpack and walked out the front door at 6:52 p.m. The sun was beginning to set. Rachel Chin lived 6 blocks away, a 12-minute walk that Emily had made hundreds of times. The route was simple: down Maple Street, left on Oakwood, through the small park with the rusted swing set, past the undeveloped lot where the city had planned to build a community center but never found the funding, then right on Birch Lane to Rachel's house. Emily arrived at 7:04 p.m. Rachel's mother offered them snacks. The girls worked on their project until about 8:30, then spent the next 15 minutes looking at something on Rachel's phone. A video, a meme, something teenage and inconsequential that Rachel would later struggle to remember through her tears. At 8:45 p.m., Emily announced she needed to head home. "Want my mom to drive you?" Rachel asked. Emily glanced out the window. The streetlights were on. The neighborhood was quiet. She'd walked this route at night a dozen times before. "Nah, I'm good. It's like 10 minutes. She hugged Rachel goodbye. She texted her mother, "Leaving Rachel's now. Home soon." Karen replied with a thumbs-up emoji. And then Emily Hartwell stepped out into the October night, and no one who loved her ever saw her alive again. Now I need to tell you about the route. Emily walked down Birch Lane toward the park. The streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the sidewalk, but there were gaps, stretches of shadow between one light and the next. The park itself was poorly lit. Budget cuts had eliminated 2 of the 4 lamps years ago, and no one had bothered to replace them. But the darkest stretch of Emily's walk was the undeveloped lot on Oakwood Avenue. 2 acres of overgrown grass and scraggly trees, surrounded by a chain-link fence with gaps large enough for a person to slip through. The city had owned the land for a decade, promising a community center, a youth sports facility, something that would benefit the neighborhood. Instead, it sat empty. The nearest streetlight was 40 yards away. On a moonless night, and October 15th was moonless, the lot was a void. A pocket of darkness in an otherwise ordinary neighborhood. Marcus Whitmore had identified these locations 3 months earlier. He'd timed how long it took for a person to walk from one end of the dark stretch to the other. 38 seconds. He'd noted that no houses directly faced the lot. He'd observed that at this hour, between 8:45 and 9:15 p.m., foot traffic on Oakwood was essentially non-existent. Dog walkers had finished. Late commuters hadn't yet arrived. It was, he'd written in his journal, the perfect geometry. At 8:47 p.m., Marcus slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence and positioned himself behind a cluster of overgrown bushes near the sidewalk. And he waited. What happened next comes from multiple sources. Forensic evidence, Marcus's own eventual statements to investigators, and the cold physical facts of what was found at the scene. I'm not going to describe it gratuitously. That's not what this story is about. But I need you to understand the reality of what occurred, because the horror of it, the calculated cruelty, is essential to understanding everything that followed. Emily was walking quickly. She had her phone in her hand, the screen's glow illuminating her face. She was probably checking the time, maybe composing another text to her mother. She was thinking about homework, about the project she'd just worked on, about whether Tyler had eaten the last of the ice cream again. She wasn't thinking about danger. Why would she? This was her neighborhood. She'd walked this route since childhood. She didn't hear Marcus until he was already moving. The attack was brief. Efficient. Marcus had practiced the motions in his mind for months. He'd researched the most effective methods. He'd prepared for resistance. He was clinical about it, later describing his own actions to detectives with a detachment that made seasoned investigators physically ill. Emily fought. I want you to know that. She fought with everything she had. Scratched. Kicked. Tried to scream. But Marcus had planned for that too. The location was too isolated. The darkness too complete. By 8:51 p.m., it was over. 4 minutes. That's all it took to end 16 years of life. 16 years of birthday parties and family dinners and shelter dogs and Sunday lunches with Nana Rose. 4 minutes to silence a laugh that could cure a bad day. Marcus stood over Emily's body in the darkness, breathing hard, not from exertion, he would later clarify, but from exhilaration. He felt nothing like remorse. He felt powerful. The next 45 minutes demonstrated the depth of Marcus's preparation. He had brought supplies in a backpack, gloves, a change of clothes, plastic bags, cleaning materials. He had scouted the drainage culvert at the far edge of the lot weeks earlier, noting that it was deep enough to conceal a body, obscured enough to avoid casual discovery. He moved Emily's body with mechanical efficiency. He collected her phone, her backpack, the necklace she'd been wearing, a small silver pendant her grandmother had given her for her 15th birthday. Trophies, though he wouldn't have used that word. Evidence of his accomplishment. He changed his clothes, bagging the ones he'd worn during the attack. He would dispose of them later, in a dumpster behind a grocery store 3 miles from his home. By 9:30 p.m., Marcus had slipped back through the gap in the fence, crossed through 2 backyards to avoid the main streets, and arrived home. His mother was in the kitchen when he walked through the door. "You're back early," she said. "I thought you were studying at the library." "Finished my project faster than I expected," Marcus replied, his voice perfectly level. "What's for dinner?" They ate together. Meatloaf. Mashed potatoes. Marcus complained that his history teacher had assigned too much reading. Linda talked about a sale she'd seen at the department store. The television played softly in the background, a sitcom, canned laughter filling the silences. 4 blocks away, Karen Hartwell was beginning to worry. The text had said, "Home soon." By 9:15, Emily wasn't home. Karen called her daughter's phone. No answer. She told herself Emily had probably stopped to chat with a neighbor, lost track of time, let her phone battery die. Teenagers. By 9:30, the worry had curdled into fear. Karen called Rachel's house. Rachel confirmed Emily had left at 8:45. By 9:45, David Hartwell was in his car, driving the route between Rachel's house and their own, scanning the sidewalks, the park, the shadows. He drove it 3 times. He saw nothing. By 10 p.m., the Cedar Rapids Police Department received a missing person report for Emily Marie Hartwell, 16 years old, brown hair, brown eyes, last seen wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. By midnight, the neighborhood was full of flashlights and shouting voices. And 4 blocks away, Marcus Whitmore lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in his mind. He had done it. He had actually done it. And no one had any idea. What does hope sound like when it's dying? I'll tell you. It sounds like a phone that never rings with good news. It sounds like a mother's voice growing hoarse from calling her daughter's name into empty fields. It sounds like a 12-year-old boy asking every morning, "Did they find her yet?" And the silence that follows. For 3 weeks, Cedar Rapids held its breath. For 3 weeks, the Hartwell family lived in a suspended nightmare, trapped between the desperate belief that Emily might still be alive and the creeping terror that she was already gone. And for 3 weeks, Marcus Whitmore watched it all unfold with the quiet satisfaction of an artist admiring his masterpiece. The first 72 hours after Emily's disappearance transformed Cedar Rapids into a community possessed by a single purpose. By dawn on October 16th, over 200 volunteers had gathered at Jefferson High School's parking lot, forming search parties that would comb every park, every wooded area, every abandoned building within a 5-mile radius. The police department deployed every available officer. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation sent a specialized missing persons unit. By the end of the first day, the FBI had opened a file. Flyers appeared on every telephone pole, every storefront window, every community bulletin board in Lynn County. Emily's junior year school photo, that radiant smile, those warm brown eyes, stared out from thousands of sheets of paper, each one a prayer made physical. Missing: Emily Marie Hartwell. Age: 16. Height: 5 feet 5 inches. Weight: 125 pounds. Last seen: October 15, 2018, approximately 8:45 p.m. Oakwood Avenue area, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. If you have any information, please contact. The tip line rang constantly. Every call sparked hope. A woman thought she'd seen Emily at a gas station in Iowa City. A truck driver reported picking up a teenage hitchhiker matching her description near Des Moines. A psychic from Minnesota called to say Emily was near water, surrounded by trees. Every lead was investigated. Every lead went nowhere. The Hartwell home became a command center of grief. Relatives arrived from out of state, Karen's sister from Minnesota, David's parents from Missouri. Neighbors rotated through in shifts, bringing casseroles no one ate, offering help no one knew how to accept. The living room filled with flowers, cards, stuffed animals left by Emily's classmates. A shrine to a girl who might still be coming home. Karen stopped sleeping almost entirely. She would sit at the kitchen table through the night, her phone clutched in her hands, waiting for the call that would end the nightmare one way or another. When she did close her eyes, she saw Emily, walking through the front door, laughing about some misunderstanding, safe and whole and wondering what all the fuss was about. Then she would wake up, and the silence would crush her all over again. David threw himself into the search with a manic intensity that worried everyone who knew him. He was out every day, leading volunteer groups, personally checking locations the police had already cleared. He couldn't sit still. Stillness meant thinking, and thinking meant confronting possibilities he wasn't ready to face. And Tyler, 12-year-old Tyler, who idolized his big sister, who couldn't imagine a world without her teasing him about his crushes, Tyler simply shut down. He stopped talking. He stopped eating. He sat in his room with the door closed, playing video games he wasn't really seeing, waiting for someone to tell him this was all a bad dream. The family was disintegrating in slow motion, and they didn't even have a body to bury. Now here's where the story takes a turn that should make your stomach clench. Because while the Hartwells were drowning in anguish, while the community was exhausting itself in a desperate search, Marcus Whitmore was inserting himself into the tragedy with calculated precision. He joined the search parties. Not every day. That would be suspicious. But 2, maybe 3 times a week, Marcus would show up at the volunteer staging area, sign in, and spend hours combing through fields and forests alongside people who were genuinely desperate to find Emily. He wore the appropriately somber expression. He asked the right questions. He expressed just the right amount of hope. And he was careful, so careful, to never search anywhere near the drainage culvert where he'd hidden her body. But he got close. One afternoon, Marcus's search group was assigned to the area near the undeveloped lot on Oakwood. He walked within 100 yards of Emily's remains, close enough that he could feel the proximity humming in his blood like electricity. A volunteer beside him, a woman in her 50s with tears in her eyes, said she was praying they wouldn't find anything bad. "Me too," Marcus replied, his voice soft with manufactured concern. Inside, he was smiling. But the search parties weren't enough to satisfy Marcus's hunger for involvement. He needed more. He needed to be closer to the grief, to taste it, to know that he was the architect of all this suffering. On October 18th, 3 days after the murder, a Facebook page appeared, Justice for Emily Hartwell. Within hours, it had thousands of followers. The page shared updates from the official investigation, organized candlelight vigils, collected donations for a reward fund. It became the central hub for a community's anguish, a digital gathering place where people could share memories of Emily, post prayers for her safe return, and pledge their commitment to finding her. The administrator of the page was anonymous. It was Marcus. He had created the account using a fake email, accessing it through a VPN to mask his location. Every night, he would log in and scroll through the comments, the tearful tributes, the desperate pleas, the raw expressions of grief, and he would feel a warmth spreading through his chest. They were all performing for him. They just didn't know it. He posted updates in a tone of heartfelt solidarity. "Still no news today, but we won't give up. Emily, if you're out there, we're looking for you. We will never stop looking." The comments flooded in. Hearts. Prayers. Promises. And Marcus drank it all in like water in a desert. The vigils were his favorite. The first one was held on October 20th at Jefferson High School's football field. Over 1,000 people attended. Students, teachers, parents, community members who had never even met Emily but felt compelled to stand witness to the tragedy. Candles flickered in the darkness. Emily's friends spoke through tears about how much she meant to them. A local pastor offered prayers. Her parents stood on the makeshift stage, Karen barely able to stand, David gripping the microphone with white-knuckled hands as he begged anyone with information to come forward. Marcus stood in the crowd, a candle in his hand, his face arranged in an expression of solemn sadness. He was close enough to see Karen's tears catch the candlelight. Close enough to hear Tyler's quiet sobs. Close enough to watch David's voice break as he described his daughter's laugh. It was intoxicating. This was power. Real power. Not the pathetic social hierarchies of middle school, not the hollow praise of teachers who didn't understand him. This was something transcendent. He had reshaped reality itself. He had taken a life and transformed an entire community into an orchestra of grief, and he was the only one who knew he was conducting. After the vigil, Marcus approached the Hartwells. He waited in line behind other community members offering condolences, watching how they hugged Karen, shook David's hand, murmured empty words of comfort. When his turn came, he looked directly into Karen's eyes, red-rimmed, hollow, already aged a decade in 5 days, and said the words he'd rehearsed. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm so sorry. I didn't know Emily personally, but everyone says she was such a kind person. I'm praying for her safe return. I really am." Karen, operating on autopilot, thanked him. She didn't notice anything unusual about the quiet, polite middle schooler. She wouldn't remember his face later. He was just one of hundreds who offered condolences that night. But Marcus remembered everything. He went home that night and wrote in his journal, "I spoke to the mother today. She looked right at me and didn't see anything. She thanked me. Thanked me. They're all so blind. I am standing right in front of them, and they don't see me. I am the most powerful person in this town, and no one knows it but me." 2 more weeks passed. The searches continued, but the volunteer numbers dwindled. The media coverage slowed. The tip line still rang, but less frequently. The terrible machinery of fading hope was doing its work. And then, on November 5th, everything changed. A maintenance worker named Gerald Patterson was clearing debris from a drainage culvert at the edge of the undeveloped lot on Oakwood Avenue. The same lot the search parties had checked twice before, though never thoroughly enough. The culvert was deep, overgrown, easy to overlook. Gerald was just doing routine work, preparing for the winter rains. He saw something pale in the darkness of the pipe. He told investigators later that he knew immediately. Something about the shape, the color, the unnatural stillness. He didn't go closer. He just backed away, pulled out his phone, and called 911. By noon, the area was sealed off with yellow tape. By evening, the coroner had confirmed what everyone feared. Emily Marie Hartwell had been found. She was never coming home. The news broke like a wave crashing over Cedar Rapids. Karen collapsed when the detectives arrived at her door. Physically collapsed, David had to catch her before she hit the floor. Tyler, standing on the stairs behind them, heard his mother scream and felt something inside himself break that would never fully heal. The community that had clung to hope now drowned in grief. The Facebook page Marcus had created exploded with tributes, condolences, expressions of rage and sorrow. Another vigil was planned. The police announced that Emily's death was being investigated as a homicide. And somewhere in that tide of mourning, Marcus Whitmore felt a flicker of something he hadn't anticipated. Not guilt. He was incapable of that. But disappointment? It was over. The search, the suspense, the delicious uncertainty, it had ended. Emily's body had been found, and soon the investigation would run its course, and the whole thing would fade from memory. His masterpiece would be forgotten. Unless he found a way to keep it alive. That night, Marcus began composing the first message. The one that would arrive at the Hartwell home 2 months later. The one that would contain details only the killer could know. The one that would end with those 6 devastating words. She begged, and I laughed. He couldn't let them move on. He couldn't let them forget. He needed them to know, forever, that someone had done this. That someone brilliant and powerful had reshaped their lives. Even if they never knew his name, they would know his work. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. I want to ask you to do 2 quick things right now. First, if this story has gripped you the way it's gripped me, take a second to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Second, leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches. Now, let's get back into it, because the investigation is about to take a turn no one saw coming. Let me introduce you to the 2 people who would ultimately dismantle Marcus Whitmore's carefully constructed fantasy of invincibility. Because here's the thing about monsters who believe they're geniuses. They always underestimate the people hunting them. They assume that because they've read a few books, watched a few documentaries, studied a few case files, they understand how investigations work. They believe their intelligence elevates them above the plodding, methodical work of actual detectives. They're wrong. And Marcus Whitmore was about to learn just how wrong he was. Detective Maria Castellanos had been with the Cedar Rapids Police Department for 15 years, the last 7 in the Major Crimes Unit. 44 years old, divorced, no children, married to the job, as the cliché goes, though Maria would have rejected that framing. She wasn't married to anything. She was simply good at what she did, and what she did mattered. Her specialty was cold cases. The ones that had gone stale. The ones where the leads had dried up and the files had been boxed and everyone had quietly accepted that justice would never come. Maria didn't accept that. She had a reputation for reopening cases that other detectives had abandoned, for finding the thread everyone else had missed, for sitting with evidence for hours, days, weeks until it finally spoke to her. She wasn't flashy. She didn't have dramatic interrogation techniques or brilliant intuitive leaps. What she had was patience. Relentless, inexhaustible patience. And an understanding of criminal psychology that came not from textbooks but from years of sitting across tables from killers and learning to read the things they didn't say. When Emily Hartwell's body was found, Maria was assigned as lead detective. Her partner was James Brennan, 12 years younger, tech-savvy in ways Maria freely admitted she wasn't, and possessed of an enthusiasm that hadn't yet been ground down by the weight of the work. Brennan had joined Major Crimes only 18 months earlier, after a stint in the department's cybercrime unit. He understood digital forensics the way Maria understood human behavior. Instinctively, fluently, as a native language. They made an effective team. Maria read people. Brennan read data. And together, they began to build a picture of what had happened to Emily Hartwell. The crime scene told a story of careful planning. The drainage culvert where Emily's body was found had been selected deliberately. It was deep enough to conceal remains, obscured enough to avoid casual discovery, and located in an area that search parties had checked only superficially. Whoever had put her there understood the geography of the lot, understood how searches were conducted, understood what investigators would and wouldn't find. The forensic evidence was frustratingly sparse. No fingerprints. No DNA under Emily's fingernails, despite clear signs that she had fought her attacker. Her clothing had been wiped down with some kind of cleaning agent. Her phone was missing. So was her backpack, her wallet, and the silver necklace her grandmother had given her. The medical examiner's report confirmed cause of death but provided few additional leads. Time of death was estimated between 8:45 and 9:30 p.m. on October 15th, consistent with Emily's walk home from Rachel's house. This wasn't impulsive, Maria said to Brennan as they reviewed the scene photos. This was planned. Extensively planned. Someone studied her routine, selected this location, prepared for forensic countermeasures. This wasn't some random predator. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Brennan nodded. So we're looking for someone with connection to Emily. Someone who knew her schedule. And someone smart enough to think they've outsmarted us, Maria added. That's important. Remember that. The initial suspect list was exactly what you'd expect in a case like this. First, registered sex offenders in the area. There were 7 within a 5-mile radius of the crime scene, including one, a 42-year-old named Harold Vance, who lived just 2 miles from the Hartwell home. Vance had a prior conviction for assault and had been seen in the neighborhood in the weeks before Emily's disappearance. Detectives interviewed him extensively. His alibi was shaky. His demeanor was evasive. For several days, he was the primary focus of the investigation, and the community buzzed with rumors that an arrest was imminent. But Vance's story ultimately checked out. Cell phone records placed him at a bar in downtown Cedar Rapids during the window of Emily's disappearance. Multiple witnesses confirmed his presence. He was a predator, but he wasn't this predator. Second, Emily's ex-boyfriend, a 17-year-old named Derek Rawlings. They had dated briefly the previous year and broken up amicably, by all accounts. But breakups could mask resentments, and detectives had to be thorough. Derek was devastated by Emily's death. Genuinely devastated. Maria had been doing this long enough to recognize authentic grief versus performed emotion. His alibi was solid. He'd been at a family dinner 2 towns away the night Emily disappeared, surrounded by a dozen relatives who could verify his presence. Third, a substitute teacher named Martin Cross, who had worked at Jefferson High the previous spring and had received complaints about inappropriate attention toward female students. Cross had left the school before any formal action was taken, and his current whereabouts were initially unclear. Tracking him down took 3 days. When detectives finally located him in Omaha, they found a troubled man but not a killer. Cross had been at a psychiatric facility on October 15th, receiving treatment for depression. His alibi was ironclad. Each suspect eliminated. Each lead exhausted. Each dead end adding to the pressure mounting on the department. The community wanted answers. The media wanted updates. The Hartwell family wanted justice. And the killer was still out there. Then the first message arrived. November 12th, 1 week after Emily's body was discovered. A plain white envelope, no return address, delivered to the Cedar Rapids Police Department's main station. Inside, a single sheet of paper with block handwriting. Maria was the first detective to read it. The message was brief, barely 3 sentences, but its content made her blood run cold. It referenced a specific detail about the crime scene, the position of Emily's hands when she was found. That detail had been deliberately withheld from all press releases, all public statements, all media reports. Only investigators and the killer could know it. The message ended with a taunt. "You're looking in all the wrong places. You'll never find me. I'm smarter than all of you." Maria stared at the paper for a long moment, her mind racing through implications. The killer wasn't just evading capture. The killer was playing a game, watching the investigation, taking pleasure in its failures. And most importantly, the killer wanted attention, needed it, was willing to risk exposure just to prove his superiority. That was a psychological profile Maria understood intimately. Narcissism this profound was both a weapon and a weakness. It drove the killer to take risks that rational self-preservation would forbid. And eventually, inevitably, it would drive him to make a mistake. She called Brennan into her office and showed him the message. "Get this to the lab for analysis," she said. "Paper type, ink composition, handwriting patterns, everything. And I want you to start building a linguistic profile. Word choice, sentence structure, psychological indicators. Whoever wrote this thinks they're brilliant. Let's use that against them." Brennan took the evidence bag carefully. "You think he'll send more?" Maria nodded slowly, her eyes distant, already building the killer's profile in her mind. "He can't help himself," she said. "He needs us to know how clever he is. He needs an audience. And that need is going to destroy him." Over the following days, Maria began to construct a psychological portrait of the killer. The profile emerged piece by piece, drawn from the crime scene evidence, the message, and patterns she'd observed across years of similar cases. Male. Almost certainly male. The nature of the attack, the physical logistics, the psychological profile all pointed to a male perpetrator. Young. The arrogance was raw, untempered by experience. The need for validation was adolescent in its intensity. The references to intelligence felt compensatory, someone who needed to prove their superiority because they weren't receiving recognition elsewhere. Local. The killer knew the neighborhood intimately, knew Emily's routine, knew which areas search parties would overlook. This wasn't an outsider. This was someone embedded in the community, connected to Emily's world. Not necessarily close to her, but close enough to observe her, to learn her patterns, to develop a fixation. Pathologically narcissistic. The taunting message wasn't about evading capture, it was about being acknowledged. The killer's ego demanded recognition even at the cost of increased risk. Maria shared these observations with Brennan during a late-night session in the conference room they'd converted into a war room. Photos of Emily covered one wall. Maps of the crime scene covered another. A timeline stretched across a whiteboard, gaps still waiting to be filled. "Here's what bothers me," Maria said, tapping the evidence bag containing the message. "This level of planning suggests maturity. But this level of arrogance suggests immaturity. It's contradictory. Unless," Brennan offered, "we're looking at someone who's intellectually mature but emotionally juvenile. Someone who's smart enough to plan a crime but not wise enough to stay quiet about it." Maria looked at him. Go on. A teenager, Brennan said slowly, testing the idea as he spoke. An older teenager, someone bright, someone who thinks they're smarter than everyone around them, someone who'd get off on proving that intelligence through something like this. Maria was quiet for a moment. The idea felt outlandish. A teenage killer who planned with this level of sophistication? Who taunted investigators with this level of confidence? But she'd learned long ago to never dismiss a theory simply because it felt uncomfortable. Let's keep that possibility open, she said. And let's see what he sends next. She didn't have to wait long. I need to explain something to you about the psychology of what we're witnessing. Because from the outside, Marcus Whitmore's behavior after Emily's death seems inexplicable. Insane, even. Why would someone who had committed the perfect crime, who had evaded detection, who had fooled an entire community, who was completely in the clear, deliberately insert himself into the investigation? Why send taunting messages? Why take risks that served no practical purpose? The answer lies in understanding what narcissism actually is. Not the colloquial kind, not just someone who's vain or self-centered. I'm talking about pathological narcissism. The kind that hollows out a person's interior until nothing remains but an endless, aching hunger for something called narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is the emotional fuel that pathological narcissists require to function. It comes from attention, admiration, fear, control, any reaction that confirms their sense of superiority and specialness. For most people, self-worth comes from internal sources. Values, relationships, achievements that matter regardless of who's watching. For a narcissist like Marcus, self-worth came exclusively from external validation. And here's the terrible irony. Getting away with murder gave Marcus no supply at all. Think about it. He had committed what he considered the ultimate act of power and intelligence. He had taken a life, outwitted investigators, and fooled an entire community. But no one knew. No one could appreciate his brilliance. The achievement existed in a vacuum, unwitnessed and therefore, to Marcus's broken psychology, almost meaningless. The taunting wasn't about sadism, though sadism was certainly present. The taunting was about audience. Marcus needed someone to know how clever he was. And if he couldn't reveal himself directly, he would reveal himself indirectly, through messages that demonstrated his knowledge, his control, his godlike position above the grieving masses who couldn't begin to comprehend what he'd done. He was playing God. And gods require worshippers. The messages escalated throughout November and December. The second one arrived on November 19th, again at the police station. Same block handwriting. Same plain envelope. This time, the content was more detailed, a reference to the cleaning agent Marcus had used to wipe down evidence, a specific brand that investigators had identified but never disclosed publicly. You found the body, but you'll never find me. I was careful. More careful than you can imagine. The Hartwell girl thought she was safe too. She wasn't. The third message came on November 28th, Thanksgiving Day. This one was delivered not to the police but to the Hartwell home, mixed in with the holiday cards and sympathy letters still trickling in from distant relatives and strangers. Karen opened it. The message contained a description of what Emily was wearing the night she died, specific enough that Karen recognized every detail. The gray hoodie. The jeans with the small tear on the left knee. The white sneakers she'd begged for the previous Christmas. I remember exactly what she looked like. Do you? Or is the memory already starting to fade? Don't worry. I'll help you remember. I'll never let you forget. David found Karen on the kitchen floor 20 minutes later, the letter clutched in her trembling hands, her body racked with sobs so violent she could barely breathe. The police installed a security camera on the Hartwell property that night. It captured nothing. Marcus had dropped the letter in a public mailbox across town, untraceable, anonymous. He was learning, adapting, getting bolder. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just the messages. He needed more direct contact with the grief he'd created. He needed to stand in the presence of suffering and know, with absolute certainty, that he was its architect. The vigils gave him that. A second vigil was held on November 10th, after Emily's body was discovered. A third on December 15th, marking 2 months since her death. Marcus attended both, candle in hand, face arranged in an expression of solemn mourning that he'd practiced in front of his bedroom mirror. He positioned himself carefully in the crowds, close enough to see the Hartwells but not so close that he'd be memorable. He watched Karen's hollow eyes, David's rigid jaw, Tyler's empty stare. He absorbed their pain like sunlight, feeling it warm something cold and empty inside him. At the December vigil, a local news crew interviewed attendees about their memories of Emily. Marcus made sure to walk past the camera at least twice. He didn't speak to the reporter, that would be too risky, but he wanted to be captured. He wanted to exist in the footage. Later, he would watch the news segment over and over, pausing on the frames where his face appeared in the background, savoring the secret knowledge of what he was. But the vigils weren't the most dangerous thing Marcus did. The most dangerous thing happened on December 20th. The Hartwell family was hosting a small memorial gathering at their home. Close friends, family members, Emily's teachers, and classmates. It wasn't advertised publicly, but word spread through the community the way such things do. People dropped by with flowers, with food, with halting words of comfort. Marcus decided to attend. He told his mother he was going to a friend's house to study for finals. Instead, he walked the 4 blocks to Maple Street and joined the quiet stream of mourners approaching the Hartwell home. His heart was pounding, not from fear but from anticipation. This was the closest he'd ever been to the center of his creation. The house itself seemed to pulse with grief, every window radiating the particular heaviness of a family destroyed. He walked through the front door, signed the guest book with a fake name, Michael Warren, and a generic message of condolence. Accepted a cup of punch from a woman he didn't recognize. Moved through the room slowly, examining photos of Emily on the walls, listening to fragments of conversation. She was such a beautiful girl. I still can't believe it. Who would do something like this? Marcus absorbed it all. Every tear. Every whispered memory. Every unanswerable question. He was invisible in plain sight, the architect of all this suffering standing in the living room with a cup of fruit punch, and no one saw him for what he was. And then he saw Karen Hartwell. She was standing by the fireplace, receiving condolences from a line of people that seemed to have no end. Her face was gaunt. Her eyes were red-rimmed and distant. She looked like a woman who had aged 20 years in 2 months, because she had. Marcus got in line. He waited patiently as others cycled through. He watched how they hugged Karen, how they murmured words of comfort, how she responded with automatic gratitude that never reached her eyes. When his turn came, he stepped forward and looked directly into the face of the woman whose daughter he had murdered. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice soft and respectful, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Emily seemed like an amazing person. I wish I had known her better." Karen nodded, her hand gripping his briefly. Cold, thin fingers that had forgotten what warmth felt like. "Thank you for coming. It means so much. I'll be praying for your family," Marcus added. He held her gaze for just a moment longer than necessary. Just long enough to feel the full weight of the moment. Then he moved on, disappearing into the crowd, another faceless mourner in an endless parade of grief. But he wasn't done. In the hallway, Marcus slipped his phone from his pocket. He activated the camera. And for the next 15 minutes, he wandered through the Hartwell home, secretly recording everything. The photos of Emily, the tearful conversations, the family's devastation captured in intimate, invasive detail. He got Karen on video 3 times. Tyler twice. David once, his face crumpled with a grief he was trying and failing to hide. Marcus walked out of the house with the footage saved to his phone, his heart singing with triumph. Later that night, alone in his room, he watched the videos over and over. Karen thanking him for coming. Her hand in his. Her hollow eyes looking through him without seeing. He wrote in his journal, "I stood in their house. I touched her hand. I recorded everything. I am standing in the center of their tragedy and they are thanking me. They have no idea. No one has any idea. I am the most powerful person any of them have ever met, and they'll never know it. This feeling, this is what it means to be alive. This is what it means to be God." Meanwhile, Detective Maria Castellanos was building her profile with each new message. The linguistic patterns were becoming clearer. The vocabulary was sophisticated but not adult, advanced for a teenager perhaps, but lacking the rhythms and references that would suggest someone older. The arrogance was adolescent in its rawness, unbuffered by the self-awareness that usually developed with age. And there was something else. A recurring theme in the messages that Maria found significant. The killer kept referencing intelligence. "I'm smarter than all of you. I was more careful than you can imagine. You'll never find me." The emphasis wasn't on the crime itself, but on the cleverness of having committed it. This wasn't someone motivated by hatred of Emily or even by the pleasure of killing. This was someone motivated by the need to prove superiority. "He's not just narcissistic," Maria told Brennan during one of their late-night sessions. "He's compensating for something. Some perceived inadequacy. Some wound to his ego that he's trying to heal by proving how brilliant he is." "The rejection," Brennan said slowly. "You think something happened between him and Emily? Something that set this off?" "It fits the profile. Narcissistic injury, the psychological term for when a narcissist's ego is wounded. For most people, rejection stings and then fades. For someone with this psychology, rejection can feel like an existential threat. Something to be punished." Brennan pulled up the records they'd been compiling, lists of people connected to Emily's life. Friends, classmates, acquaintances, teachers, anyone who might have had contact with her in the months before her death. "We've interviewed most of these people," he said. "No one stood out." "Then we're missing someone," Maria replied. "Someone we haven't considered. Someone who's hiding in plain sight." She thought about the messages, the sophistication of the planning, the juvenile need for recognition. "Expand the search," she said. "I want to look at students from the junior high too. Anyone who might have had contact with Emily through school events, shared activities, anything. This killer is young, James. I can feel it. And he's closer than we think." Neither detective knew just how close. Neither could have imagined that the killer had stood in the victim's living room just days earlier, shaking the mother's hand, recording her grief, drinking fruit punch while surrounded by the family he had destroyed. But they were getting closer. And Marcus, drunk on his own perceived invincibility, had no idea that the net was beginning to tighten. Every killer leaves a trail. I don't care how smart they think they are. I don't care how many forensic documentaries they've watched or how many crime novels they've read or how many hours they've spent convincing themselves they're the exception to every rule. Every single person who commits a crime leaves something behind. Sometimes it's physical, a fingerprint, a hair follicle, a fiber from their clothing. But in the modern age, the trail is increasingly digital. And digital trails are insidious things. They hide in places you'd never think to look. They linger long after you believe you've erased them. They whisper secrets to people who know how to listen. Detective James Brennan knew how to listen. And he was about to hear something that would crack this case wide open. The messages had been carefully constructed to avoid obvious tracing. No return address. Generic paper and envelopes available at any office supply store. Block handwriting that revealed no identifying flourishes. The killer had done his homework on physical evidence. But Brennan wasn't interested in the physical evidence. He was interested in the words themselves. Linguistic forensics is a discipline most people have never heard of. It operates on a simple premise. Every person has a unique way of using language. Word choice, sentence structure, punctuation patterns, spelling tendencies. These elements combine to create a linguistic fingerprint as distinctive as the whorls on your thumb. Most people are completely unaware of their own patterns. They think they're writing in a neutral, untraceable way. They're wrong. Brennan spent 3 days analyzing the messages Marcus had sent. He cataloged every word choice, every sentence structure, every punctuation decision. He ran the text through software designed to identify linguistic patterns, comparing the results against databases of known writing samples. He looked for anomalies, words that appeared with unusual frequency, grammatical constructions that deviated from standard usage, rhythms and cadences that might reveal something about the writer's age, education, or background. What he found was illuminating. The vocabulary was advanced but inconsistent. The killer used words like meticulous and comprehend correctly, but occasionally stumbled into constructions that felt slightly off, the kind of mistakes a bright teenager might make when trying to sound more sophisticated than they actually were. The sentence rhythms were punchy and aggressive, lacking the subordinate clauses and qualifications that typically characterized adult writing. The killer wrote in declarations, not observations. Certainties, not possibilities. And there was something else. A word that appeared 3 times across the various messages, used in a slightly unusual way, inevitable. Your failure is inevitable. The truth becoming clear is inevitable. My victory is inevitable. Most people would use inevitable once in a piece of writing, if at all. This writer was drawn to it, almost compulsively. It suggested someone fixated on destiny, on predetermined outcomes, on the certainty of their own superiority. Brennan flagged the pattern and added it to his growing linguistic profile. But the real breakthrough came from the Facebook page. The Justice for Emily Hartwell page had accumulated over 12,000 followers since its creation. It had become the community's central hub for mourning, for sharing memories, for demanding justice. Hundreds of people had posted tributes. Thousands had left comments. The page had organized vigils, collected donations, amplified media coverage. And someone had created it within hours of Emily's disappearance being reported. Brennan found that timing suspicious. When a person goes missing, it typically takes days for organized community response to develop. Friends and family are too shocked, too focused on immediate searches, too hopeful for a quick resolution to think about creating social media infrastructure. The fact that this page had appeared so quickly, so professionally designed, so strategically positioned, suggested someone who wasn't shocked at all. Someone who was prepared. Someone who knew Emily wasn't coming back because they had made sure of it. Brennan obtained a warrant for Facebook's cooperation in accessing the page's administrative data. The results were frustrating at first glance. The administrator account was linked to an email address that didn't correspond to any real person, a Gmail account created with fake credentials, accessed exclusively through VPN services that masked the user's true location. But VPNs aren't perfect. Nothing digital is perfect. Brennan dug deeper. He obtained records of every login to the administrator account, tracking IP addresses, connection times, and the specific VPN services used. He cross-referenced this data with known VPN vulnerabilities and law enforcement databases. And on December 28th, he found something. One login, just one, on November 3rd, 2 days before Emily's body was found, had occurred without the VPN properly activating. A momentary glitch. A fraction of a second where the user's true IP address was exposed before the protection kicked in. That IP address was registered to a residential internet service in Cedar Rapids. The address was 847 Oak Avenue. The Whitmore residence. Brennan brought the information to Maria immediately. Oak Avenue, Maria said, studying the report. That's 4 blocks from the Hartwell home. I've already pulled the records, Brennan replied. The residence belongs to Richard and Linda Whitmore. Richard is a pharmaceutical sales rep, travels constantly. Linda is a homemaker. They have 1 child. He slid a photograph across the desk. Maria looked at it for a long moment. A school photo. A young face with sharp, intelligent eyes. A slight smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. An expression that seemed somehow performed. Marcus Whitmore, Brennan said. 14 years old. 8th grade at Cedar Rapids Junior High. Honor student. Debate team captain. No disciplinary record. Maria felt something click into place. The profile she'd been building, young, intelligent, narcissistic, locally connected, suddenly had a face. What do we know about his connection to Emily? They attended different schools, but there's overlap. The junior high and high school share certain events, assemblies, sports games, academic competitions. I pulled the attendance records for shared events in the months before Emily's death. He handed Maria another document. A list of school functions that both Marcus and Emily had attended. One entry was highlighted. September 28th. A combined assembly about college preparation. Both students were present. Maria studied the date. Approximately 3 weeks before Emily's disappearance. "This is circumstantial," she said carefully. "An IP address glitch could be explained away. Attending the same assembly as the victim doesn't prove anything. We need more." "I know," Brennan agreed. "But there's something else." He pulled up another document on his laptop. "I did a deeper analysis of the Facebook page's posting patterns. The administrator posts most frequently between 9 p.m. and midnight, and almost exclusively on weekdays. On weekends, posting drops significantly. That's consistent with a student whose parents might monitor their activities more closely when school isn't in session. Or a working adult with a weekend routine," Maria countered, playing devil's advocate. "True. But look at this." Brennan pointed to a section of text he'd highlighted. One of the administrator's posts about organizing the November vigil contains the phrase, "inevitable outcome." And another post references Emily's comprehension of her situation rather than her understanding. Maria's eyes narrowed. The same linguistic patterns as the messages. Exactly. Same unusual vocabulary. Same sentence rhythms. The person running this page is the same person sending the taunts. Maria leaned back in her chair, processing. The evidence was building, but it was still fragile. A defense attorney could challenge the IP address glitch, could explain away the linguistic similarities as coincidence, could argue that a 14-year-old boy couldn't possibly have committed such a sophisticated crime. They needed something more concrete. "We can't move on this yet," she said finally. "We spook him and he destroys evidence. We lose him forever. We need to build the case layer by layer." "What about surveillance?" "Too risky at this stage. A juvenile suspect, no prior record. Any judge would want more before approving that level of intrusion." Maria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gray December sky. 4 blocks away, a 14-year-old boy was probably sitting in his bedroom, congratulating himself on his own brilliance, utterly convinced that no one was smart enough to see through his mask. She was going to prove him wrong. "Start building a comprehensive profile," she told Brennan. "Everything we can find on Marcus Whitmore without alerting him or his family. School records, social media accounts, extracurricular activities. I want to know what he reads, who he talks to, how he spends his time. And keep analyzing those messages. The more linguistic data we have, the stronger our case becomes." She turned back to face her partner. "He thinks he's playing a game with us. He thinks he's winning. Let him keep thinking that. Because while he's busy admiring his own cleverness, we're going to build a case so airtight that his genius won't mean a damn thing." But even as the investigation quietly pivoted toward Marcus Whitmore, the killer was planning his next move. The messages had been satisfying, but they weren't enough. The vigils had been intoxicating, but the thrill was fading. He needed something bigger. Something that would cement his legend forever. On the night of December 30th, Marcus sat at his desk and began planning what he considered his masterpiece. A message so devastating, so impossible to ignore, that the Hartwell family would never recover. He would include a photograph. Not just any photograph. The silver necklace Emily had been wearing the night she died. The one her grandmother had given her, the one that had never been found. He had kept it hidden in a box beneath his bed, taking it out occasionally to hold it, to remember. He would photograph it. He would send that photograph to the Hartwells. And they would know, with absolute, undeniable certainty, that he had been there. That he had touched their daughter. That he possessed a piece of her that they would never get back. It would destroy them. And it would prove, once and for all, that he was untouchable. There's a particular kind of irony in what happened next. Marcus Whitmore believed he was about to deliver his killing blow. He believed the photograph would be the ultimate demonstration of his power, his intelligence, his complete dominance over the grieving family and the bumbling investigators who couldn't find him. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly have understood, was that he was about to hand Maria Castellanos exactly what she needed. The necklace wasn't just a trophy. It was evidence. And the photograph wouldn't just torment the Hartwells. It would also reveal something Marcus hadn't considered. Something small. Something he would overlook because his arrogance made him blind to his own mistakes. Something that would change everything. But we'll get to that. First, I need to tell you about a suspect that nearly derailed the entire investigation. A young man named Devon Marsh, whose troubled past made him the perfect scapegoat, and whose innocence would take precious weeks to establish. Because the path to justice is never straight. And sometimes, before you find the truth, you have to wade through all the lies. I want to tell you something about investigations that television never gets right. In the movies, detectives follow a straight line from crime to suspect to arrest. Clues appear in convenient order. Revelations build logically upon each other. The puzzle pieces fall into place with satisfying precision, and by the final act, justice is served with a neat little bow. Reality is messier. Reality involves wrong turns. Dead ends. Suspects who look guilty but aren't. Evidence that points in the wrong direction. Weeks of work that lead absolutely nowhere. And the constant gnawing fear that while you're chasing shadows, the real killer is out there. Watching, waiting, getting further away with every wasted hour. The investigation into Emily Hartwell's murder was about to take one of those wrong turns. And it would cost precious time that the Hartwell family couldn't afford to lose. His name was Devon Marsh. Devon Marsh was 19 years old, a former student at Jefferson High who had graduated, barely, 2 years before Emily's death. He lived with his mother in a small apartment on the east side of Cedar Rapids, worked part-time at a gas station, and had a history that made him an almost irresistible suspect. In his senior year, Devon had been suspended twice for what school administrators delicately termed inappropriate attention toward female students. He'd followed a sophomore girl to her car after school. He'd sent unsolicited messages to another student's social media accounts. He'd been caught taking photographs of classmates without their consent. No charges were ever filed. Devon's mother had begged the school for leniency, citing her son's difficult childhood, an absent father, untreated anxiety, social struggles that made normal interaction challenging. The school, eager to avoid scandal, had agreed to let Devon finish his coursework remotely and graduate without ceremony. But his reputation lingered. When Emily's body was found, Devon's name surfaced almost immediately. An anonymous tipster, never identified, called the police hotline and mentioned that Devon had been seen acting strangely near Jefferson High in the weeks before Emily's disappearance. Another caller claimed to have seen Devon's car parked near the undeveloped lot on Oakwood Avenue, though she couldn't specify the date. Detectives pulled Devon's records. His alibi for the night of October 15th was vague. He claimed to have been home alone, watching movies, while his mother worked a night shift at the hospital where she was a nursing aide. No one could confirm his whereabouts. On December 5th, Maria Castellanos and James Brennan brought Devon Marsh in for questioning. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. Devon was nervous, visibly, almost pathologically nervous. He sweated through his shirt within the first 20 minutes. His eyes darted around the room. His answers were halting, inconsistent, sometimes contradictory. He couldn't remember exactly what he'd watched that night. He couldn't explain why his phone had been turned off for a 3-hour window. He couldn't account for a gas station purchase in a neighborhood near the crime scene. To Maria's experienced eye, Devon Marsh looked like a man hiding something. "Tell me about Emily Hartwell," she said, her voice calm and conversational. Devon's face twisted with something that looked like pain. "I didn't know her. Not really. I mean, I knew who she was. Everyone did. She was popular, I guess. Nice. Did you ever talk to her?" "No. I mean, maybe once or twice. I don't remember. But you were interested in her." Devon's hands clenched on the table. "It wasn't like that. I wasn't. I didn't do anything wrong. I noticed her sometimes. But I never talked to her. I never." He trailed off, his breathing rapid, his eyes wet with what might have been tears or might have been fear. Maria exchanged a glance with Brennan. Something was wrong with Devon Marsh, that much was obvious. But was he a killer? She pushed harder. "We know about your history, Devon. The suspensions. The girls you followed. The photographs you took without permission. You have a pattern. And now a girl is dead, A girl you noticed, a girl you were interested in, and you expect us to believe it's coincidence." Devon started crying then. Full, heaving sobs that shook his entire body. "I didn't hurt her," he gasped between breaths. "I swear to God. I didn't hurt anyone. I know what you think of me. I know what everyone thinks. But I'm not. I couldn't. I would never." The interrogation continued, but Devon's story never changed. He maintained his innocence with a desperation that felt genuine, though Maria knew better than to trust feelings in situations like this. When they finally released him, warning him not to leave town, Devon Marsh had become the primary focus of the investigation. The media caught wind of the lead almost immediately. Someone leaked, a secretary, a dispatcher, a detective with loose lips, and within days, Devon Marsh's photograph was circulating on local news sites. The reports were careful to note that he hadn't been charged with anything, that he was merely a person of interest. But the damage was done. The community had found its monster. Devon's apartment was vandalized. His mother received death threats. He lost his job at the gas station when customers complained about his presence. Someone spray-painted the word "killer" on his car in red letters that dripped like blood. And through it all, Devon Marsh maintained his innocence. "I didn't do it," he told reporters who ambushed him outside his apartment. "I don't know who killed Emily, but it wasn't me. I'm not a murderer. I'm not." No one believed him. Meanwhile, Marcus Whitmore watched the spectacle with absolute delight. He had never heard of Devon Marsh before the news coverage began. But as soon as he understood what was happening, that investigators had identified a plausible suspect, that the community had embraced this new narrative, that the pressure on his own secret was suddenly lifting, he felt a surge of vindication. The universe was confirming what he'd always known. He was superior. Untouchable. The investigators were fools, chasing the obvious suspect while the real killer stood in plain sight. But the delight was mixed with something else. Something that surprised Marcus when he examined it closely. Disappointment. If Devon Marsh was arrested and convicted, the case would be closed. The mystery would be solved. And Marcus's masterpiece would be credited to someone else. All his brilliance, all his careful planning, all his meticulous execution, it would be attributed to a socially awkward gas station attendant who couldn't even conduct a proper interrogation without crying. That wasn't acceptable. Marcus needed to ensure that Devon Marsh didn't take credit for his work. He needed to remind everyone, the investigators, the family, the community, that the real killer was still out there. Still watching. Still in control. On January 8th, he sent another message. This time, he included the photograph. The envelope arrived at the Cedar Rapids Police Department on a gray Monday morning. Maria was in the middle of reviewing Devon Marsh's cell phone records, which had finally been obtained through a warrant, when Brennan appeared in her doorway, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said. The photograph showed a silver necklace laid out on what appeared to be a wooden surface. A pendant in the shape of a small heart. A delicate chain catching the light. The Hartwells had described this necklace in their initial interviews. It was a birthday gift from Emily's grandmother. Emily had worn it every day since receiving it. It was never recovered from the crime scene or the body. The killer had kept it. And now the killer was proving it. The accompanying message was brief. "Your suspect didn't do this. I did. You're looking in all the wrong places, and you always will be. She wore this the night I took her. She was crying. She asked me why. I didn't answer. Some questions don't have answers. Tell the family I said hello." Maria stared at the photograph, her mind racing through implications. Devon Marsh hadn't sent this. He couldn't have. He'd been under constant surveillance since becoming a suspect, his apartment watched, his phone monitored, his every movement tracked. There was no way he could have mailed an envelope without investigators knowing. Which meant Devon Marsh was innocent. Which meant they just wasted 5 weeks on the wrong suspect. Which meant the real killer was still out there, and still taunting them. But this time, the killer had made a mistake. Maria didn't see it at first. Neither did Brennan. They were too focused on the necklace itself, on the implications of its appearance, on the devastating confirmation that their primary suspect was a dead end. It took 3 more days of analysis before Brennan found it. The photograph wasn't just an image of a necklace. It was an image of a necklace on a wooden surface. And that surface had distinctive grain patterns, lines and whorls that were as unique as fingerprints. But that wasn't the mistake. The mistake was in the corner of the frame. Barely visible. Easy to overlook if you weren't specifically looking for it. A fragment of paper. A torn edge of something with printed text. Brennan enhanced the image, magnified the corner, ran it through pattern recognition software. The fragment contained 4 visible characters, EBAT. Brennan stared at the letters, rearranging them in his mind, considering possibilities. And then it clicked. He pulled up the website for Cedar Rapids Junior High School. He navigated to the extracurricular activities page. He found the debate teams section. There, prominently displayed, was a photograph of a certificate, the kind given to students who participated in regional competitions. The certificate template used by the Iowa High School Speech Association. At the bottom of every certificate was the organization's slogan, Debate, the Art of Persuasion. DEBAT. The photograph had been taken on a desk that held a debate team certificate. Brennan brought the analysis to Maria within the hour. "The killer is on a debate team," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Specifically, a debate team that participates in IHSSA competitions. And based on the linguistic profile, the Facebook page data, and the IP address glitch." "Marcus Whitmore," Maria finished. She pulled up the file they'd been quietly building. Marcus Whitmore. 14 years old. Honor student. Debate team captain. The pieces were finally coming together. "We need to move carefully," Maria said. "He's a minor. Any misstep and this whole case falls apart. But I want a warrant for his computer, his phone, and his bedroom. And I want it today." She looked at the photograph again. The necklace, the wooden desk, the fragment of certificate that Marcus had carelessly left in frame. "He wanted us to see how clever he was," she murmured. "He needed us to know that Devon wasn't the killer. He couldn't stand someone else getting credit for his work." She shook her head slowly, a grim smile crossing her face. "And that need just destroyed him." The warrant was approved on January 12, 2019. But before it could be executed, something unexpected happened. Something that accelerated the timeline in ways no one anticipated. Marcus Whitmore's mother had started asking questions. Linda Whitmore had spent 14 years convincing herself that her son was normal. Every warning sign, every uncomfortable moment, every flicker of wrongness that crossed Marcus's face, she had explained it away. Children were curious. Gifted children were different. Boys went through phases. Her son was special, not dangerous. Her son was brilliant, not broken. But in early January 2019, Linda Whitmore ran out of explanations. And the unraveling of Marcus's carefully constructed world began not with a police investigation, but with a mother who finally allowed herself to see what had been in front of her all along. It started with the late nights. Marcus had always been a disciplined sleeper, in bed by 10, up by 6:30, his schedule as precise as everything else in his life. But in the weeks after Christmas, Linda noticed a change. She would pass his bedroom door at midnight and see light glowing from beneath it. She would wake at 2 a.m. for a glass of water and hear the soft click of his keyboard. When she asked about it, Marcus had explanations ready. A research project for school. Extra preparation for an upcoming debate tournament. Trouble sleeping because of stress about finals. The explanations were plausible. They were also lies. And somewhere beneath the surface of Linda's denial, she knew it. Then came the browser history. Linda wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but she understood the basics of parental monitoring. She'd installed software on the family computer years ago, more out of general caution than specific concern. She rarely checked the logs. Marcus was such a good student, such a responsible kid, there was never any reason to worry. On January 9th, she checked. What she found made her hands shake. Searches for forensic investigation techniques. Articles about famous unsolved murders. Detailed information about how police trace anonymous messages. A disturbing amount of research into the Emily Hartwell case, news articles, social media posts, forum discussions, far more than casual interest could explain. Linda told herself it meant nothing. True crime was popular. Teenagers were morbid. Marcus was probably just fascinated by the case like everyone else in Cedar Rapids. But then she found the other searches. Searches about narcissistic personality disorder. Searches about psychopathy in adolescence. Searches that read almost like self-diagnosis. And one search, conducted at 3 a.m. on December 26th, that stopped Linda's heart entirely. Can police trace deleted messages from Gmail? That night, Linda did something she had never done in 14 years of motherhood. She searched her son's room. She waited until Marcus was at a debate team practice, a Wednesday evening session that would keep him out of the house until at least 8 p.m. Richard was on the road, as usual, somewhere in Nebraska or Kansas or one of the other states that kept him away from home 3 weeks out of every month. Linda was alone with her growing dread and her desperate need to prove herself wrong. She started with the obvious places. Desk drawers. Closet shelves. The space under his mattress. She found nothing unusual. Textbooks, debate notes, a few video games, the ordinary detritus of teenage boyhood. Then she checked under the bed. At first, she saw only dust bunnies and a forgotten sock. But when she reached further, her fingers brushed against something solid. A box. Small, wooden, pushed far back against the wall where it wouldn't be found by casual cleaning. Linda pulled it out. The box was locked with a simple latch, no padlock, no key, just a small metal clasp that opened with slight pressure. Linda hesitated for a long moment, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Part of her, the part that had spent 14 years protecting her image of her son, wanted to push the box back under the bed and pretend she'd never found it. But she'd run out of pretending. She opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was a silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Linda didn't recognize it immediately. She'd never met Emily Hartwell, never seen photographs of the girl wearing her grandmother's gift. But something about the necklace, its delicacy, its obvious sentimentality, the careful way it had been preserved, sent ice water through her veins. Beneath the necklace was a photograph. Polaroid style. Slightly blurry. It showed the necklace laid out on what Linda recognized instantly as Marcus's desk, positioned next to his debate team certificate. And beneath the photograph was a folded piece of paper. Linda's hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was a printout of a news article about Emily Hartwell's murder. Across the top, in Marcus's precise handwriting, were 3 words. My first masterpiece. Linda Whitmore did not call the police. I want you to understand that before we go any further. In that moment of horrific revelation, when the truth about her son became undeniable, Linda Whitmore did not do what most people would consider the right thing. Instead, she put everything back exactly as she'd found it. She pushed the box back under the bed. She retreated from Marcus's room, closed the door, and went downstairs to the kitchen, where she sat at the table and stared at nothing for nearly an hour. What was she thinking during that hour? I can't tell you for certain. Maybe she was processing. Maybe she was bargaining with herself, searching for some explanation that didn't require accepting the monstrous truth. Maybe she was simply paralyzed by a grief so profound it defied expression, the grief of a mother who has just lost her child, not to death, but to something far worse. Whatever her thoughts, her actions in the following days would prove decisive, though not in the way she intended. Linda called her sister. Margaret lived in Minneapolis, 3 hours away. She'd always been the practical one, the problem solver, the person Linda turned to when life became overwhelming. Linda didn't tell her sister exactly what she'd found. She couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud, but she said enough. Something's wrong with Marcus, she said, her voice hollow. Something's very wrong. I don't know what to do. Margaret listened. Margaret asked careful questions. And Margaret, who had never trusted her nephew, who had always sensed something off about those sharp, flat eyes, gave her sister advice that Linda didn't want to hear. You need to talk to someone, Margaret said. A professional. Someone who can help you figure out what's happening. I can't, Linda whispered. "If I'm wrong. And if you're right?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Linda never got the chance to follow her sister's advice. Because Margaret, unlike Linda, was not paralyzed by denial. As soon as the phone call ended, Margaret sat with her own dread for approximately 15 minutes before making a decision. She called an old college friend who happened to live in Cedar Rapids. That friend's name was Patricia Delgado. Patricia Delgado lived 3 doors down from Detective Maria Castellanos. And when Patricia mentioned, casually, over coffee the next morning, that her friend's nephew might be involved in something terrible, Maria Castellanos listened very carefully. The connection was circumstantial at best. A worried aunt's concerns, filtered through a casual conversation, reaching a detective through pure coincidence. It wouldn't hold up in court. It wouldn't justify a warrant on its own. But Maria didn't need it to justify a warrant. She already had one. What the information did was confirm her instincts. Accelerate her timeline. Transform Marcus Whitmore from a promising suspect into an urgent priority. On the morning of January 14th, exactly 3 months after Emily Hartwell's murder, Maria Castellanos and James Brennan arrived at the Whitmore residence with 4 uniformed officers and a warrant to search the premises. Linda answered the door. Her face, when she saw the badges, held no surprise. Only a profound and terrible resignation, the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this moment without admitting it, even to herself. "Mrs. Whitmore," Maria said, "we have a warrant to search this residence in connection with the murder of Emily Hartwell. Is your son Marcus home?" Linda's lips moved, but no sound came out. She simply stepped aside and pointed toward the stairs. Marcus's bedroom door was closed. He knew the moment he heard the doorbell. Some part of Marcus, the part that had planned so meticulously, that had calculated every variable, that had convinced himself of his own invincibility, had always known this moment might come. Not believed it, not expected it, but known it in the way you know that every game eventually ends. Still, the reality of it was different from the abstraction. His hands were trembling as he heard the heavy footsteps on the stairs. His heart, that steady, reliable organ that had never betrayed him during the murder, during the vigils, during the taunting, was now slamming against his ribs like an animal trying to escape. He could run. The window led to the back roof, and from there to the yard. He could be gone before they reached his door. But run where? With what resources? His entire existence was contained in this house, this town, this carefully constructed identity. Without it, he was nothing. And besides, some stubborn, arrogant core of him still believed he could talk his way out of this. He was smarter than them. He'd always been smarter than them. He could explain the necklace. He could explain the messages. He could make them doubt themselves, make them second-guess their evidence, make them see him as the innocent victim of circumstantial coincidence. He could still win. The door opened. Detective Maria Castellanos stood in the doorway, her eyes finding his with an intensity that made him feel, for the first time in his life, genuinely seen. "Marcus Whitmore," she said, "I need you to step away from the desk and keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus smiled. His debate champion smile. His teacher-charming smile. His "I'm just a good kid who couldn't possibly hurt anyone" smile. "Of course, detective," he said. "I don't know what this is about, but I'm happy to cooperate." The smile didn't work. It had never occurred to Marcus that there might be people who could see through it. The search took 3 hours. They found the necklace in its box under the bed, exactly where Linda had discovered it days earlier. They found Marcus's journal, filled with entries that documented his obsession with Emily, his planning of her murder, his satisfaction in the aftermath. They found his phone, containing the videos he'd recorded at the Hartwell Memorial, Karen's grief preserved in high definition, played and replayed dozens of times. They found drafts of the taunting messages on his computer, along with evidence linking him to the Justice for Emily Facebook page. They found his research into forensic countermeasures, his study of police investigation techniques, his meticulous timeline for the murder itself. They found everything. Marcus was escorted downstairs in handcuffs, his expression cycling through phases: confusion, indignation, anger, and finally something that might have been fear. His mother stood in the living room, her face wet with tears, unable to look at him. "Mom," Marcus said, and for just a moment, his voice sounded young. Uncertain. Almost human. "Mom, this is a mistake. I didn't do anything. You have to believe me." Linda Whitmore finally looked at her son. "I found the box," she said quietly. 3 days ago. I know what you are." Something in Marcus's face changed then. The mask slipped, fully, completely, for the first time anyone had ever witnessed. Beneath it was not a frightened child but something cold, something ancient, something that had never been human at all. "Then you know I'm smarter than all of them," he said, his voice flat. "And you know they'll never be able to prove it." Maria Castellanos stepped forward, her hand firm on Marcus's shoulder. "We already have," she said. "And your genius just made it easier." She guided him toward the front door, toward the waiting squad car, toward a future that held no room for the god he believed himself to be. Behind them, Linda Whitmore collapsed onto her sofa and began to weep. For her son, for Emily Hartwell, for the 14 years of warning signs she'd refused to see. The game was over. And Marcus Whitmore had finally, definitively lost. The news broke like a thunderclap over Cedar Rapids. A 14-year-old boy. An 8th grader. Honor student. Debate team captain. The polite kid from Oak Avenue who said, "Yes, ma'am," and "Thank you, sir," and had never received so much as a detention. That was Emily Hartwell's killer. The community didn't know how to process it. This wasn't the narrative they'd prepared themselves for. They had braced for a drifter, a predator, a monster from the margins of society. Someone whose evil could be explained by distance, by otherness, by the comfortable assurance that we would never produce something like that. Instead, the monster came from a house 4 blocks away from the victim. He had attended their schools. He had walked their streets. He had joined their search parties and attended their vigils and posted on their Facebook groups and stood among them in candlelit grief while secretly savoring every tear. The monster was one of them. And that truth was almost too terrible to bear. Marcus Whitmore was processed at the Cedar Rapids Police Department on the evening of January 14, 2019. Because he was a minor, specific protocols applied. His mother was present, though Linda could barely look at him, sitting in a plastic chair against the wall with her arms wrapped around herself as if she were freezing. A court-appointed attorney arrived within the hour, a harried public defender named Susan Chen who had handled juvenile cases for 15 years but had never encountered anything quite like this. The interrogation room was small, institutional, designed to feel claustrophobic. Marcus sat at a metal table, his hands cuffed in front of him, his school clothes, a pressed button-down shirt and khaki pants, now wrinkled and disheveled from the arrest. He looked small in the harsh fluorescent light. Young. Almost fragile. But his eyes told a different story. Detective Maria Castellanos sat across from him, a folder of evidence on the table between them. Detective Brennan stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. Susan Chen sat beside her client, her face carefully neutral despite the horror she'd felt reading the preliminary reports. "Marcus," Maria began, her voice calm and conversational, "I want to give you an opportunity to tell us what happened. In your own words. From the beginning." Marcus glanced at his attorney. Susan gave him a slight nod. She'd already advised him that cooperation might help his case, though she privately doubted anything could help at this point. Marcus turned back to Maria. And he smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn at the vigils. The same smile he'd given Karen Hartwell when he shook her hand at the memorial. Warm, polite, practiced, and utterly empty. "I don't know what you think you found," he said, "but there's obviously been some kind of mistake. I'm 14 years old. I'm an honor student. The idea that I could have done what you're suggesting is... honestly, it's absurd. I think you're so desperate to close this case that you're willing to pin it on anyone, even a child." Maria didn't react. She simply opened the folder and slid the first photograph across the table. The necklace. Emily's necklace. Photographed in the evidence bag where it now resided after being collected from Marcus's bedroom. "We found this under your bed," Maria said. "In a box you kept hidden. The necklace Emily Hartwell was wearing the night she was murdered, the necklace that was never recovered from the crime scene. Would you like to explain how it came to be in your possession?" Marcus's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough for Maria to see the machinery working behind his eyes, calculating responses, weighing options. Someone must have planted it, he said. I've never seen that necklace before in my life. Maria nodded slowly, as if considering this explanation. Then she slid another photograph across the table. This is the photograph you sent to the police department on January 8th. You'll notice the necklace in question is displayed on a wooden surface. Our forensic analysts matched the grain pattern of that surface to your desk, the same desk where we found your debate team certificate. She tapped a corner of the image. And this fragment of text visible in the corner? It matches the certificate exactly. You took this photograph in your own bedroom, Marcus. You sent it to us yourself. The smile was gone now. Marcus stared at the photograph, his jaw tightening. You also sent multiple messages to the Hartwell family, Maria continued. Messages containing details about the crime that were never released to the public. Details only the killer could know. She slid another paper across the table. Our linguistic analysts compared these messages to samples of your academic writing. The match is conclusive. Same vocabulary patterns. Same sentence structures. Same unusual word choices. She let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. And then there's your journal. Maria placed the evidence bag on the table. Inside was the leather-bound notebook they'd recovered from Marcus's desk drawer. She opened the folder to a series of photocopied pages. September 29th, she read aloud. Emily Hartwell. She's different from the others. Special. I've decided she will be mine. October 2nd. I've identified the location. The lot on Oakwood. 38 seconds of darkness. No witnesses. No cameras. Perfect geometry. October 14th. Tomorrow night. Everything is ready. She has no idea what's coming. Maria looked up from the pages, meeting Marcus's eyes directly. And November 6th, the day after her body was found, my first masterpiece. They found her, but they'll never find me. I am the most powerful person in this town, and no one knows it but me. She closed the folder. These are your words, Marcus. Your handwriting. Your admissions. Would you like to change your statement? The silence stretched for a long moment. Susan Chen leaned forward, ready to advise her client to stop talking, to invoke his right to remain silent, to let the legal process unfold without further self-incrimination. But Marcus didn't give her the chance. Something shifted in his expression. The polished mask, the one he'd worn his entire life, the one that had fooled parents and teachers and neighbors and police, cracked and fell away like plaster from a rotting wall. What emerged was something Maria had only seen a handful of times in her 15-year career. Not anger. Not fear. Not remorse. Pride. Do you know how hard it is to do what I did? His voice was different now. Lower. More confident. The voice of someone who had been waiting a long time to be recognized. Do you have any idea the level of intelligence required? The planning. The discipline. I spent 3 months preparing. 3 months. I studied forensic investigation. I analyzed police procedures. I identified every variable, every risk, every possible point of failure, and I accounted for all of them. Susan Chen grabbed his arm. Marcus, I'm advising you to stop talking immediately. Marcus shook her off without looking at her. I walked into her house, he continued, his eyes locked on Maria's. After she was dead. I stood in her living room and shook her mother's hand and recorded her crying. I joined search parties and walked within 100 yards of the body. I created the Facebook page where thousands of people posted their grief that I caused. I was everywhere. I was in every room, at every vigil, in every conversation. And none of you saw me. He leaned forward, his cuffed hands pressing flat on the metal table. You want to know why I sent the messages? Because I was bored. Because getting away with it wasn't enough. I needed them to know, not who I was, but what I was. I needed them to understand that someone out there was smarter than all of them put together. Superior. Untouchable. His smile returned, but it was different now. Colder. Truer. And I would have gotten away with it forever. If I hadn't sent that photograph, you'd still be chasing Devon Marsh. You'd have convicted an innocent man and closed the case, and I'd have spent the rest of my life knowing that I beat all of you. He shook his head slowly, something like wonder in his voice. That's the only thing I didn't account for. My own need to be recognized. I couldn't stand the thought of someone else getting credit for my work. He laughed then, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the institutional walls. I guess that's ironic, isn't it? The only person smart enough to catch me was me. Maria Castellanos had conducted hundreds of interrogations in her career. She had sat across from gang members who showed no remorse for the lives they'd taken. She had interviewed domestic abusers who blamed their victims with chilling conviction. She had looked into the eyes of killers and seen emptiness, rage, desperation, mental illness, the full spectrum of human darkness. But she had never encountered anything quite like Marcus Whitmore. The complete absence of empathy. The clinical satisfaction in describing his crimes. The genuine confusion when she asked if he felt any guilt about what he'd done to Emily, to her family, to an entire community. Guilt. He seemed to consider the word as if it were foreign. Why would I feel guilty? She was nothing. None of them are anything. They move through their lives like animals, eating, sleeping, reproducing, dying, without ever understanding anything. I understood. I saw the world as it really is. And I acted on that understanding. He tilted his head, studying Maria with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. You've caught killers before. You must have. Don't you recognize what I am? Don't you understand that I'm not like them, the angry ones, the impulsive ones, the ones who kill because they can't control themselves? His voice dropped to something almost intimate. I'm what happens when intelligence isn't burdened by the illusion of morality. I'm evolution. I'm the future. And there are more like me than you want to believe. Maria held his gaze for a long moment. What I see, she said quietly, is a 14-year-old boy who killed a girl because she didn't want to sit next to him, who spent months tormenting her family because it made him feel important, who called himself a genius but couldn't resist bragging about his crimes until he handed us everything we needed to convict him. She closed the folder and stood. You're not evolution, Marcus. You're not the future. You're a broken child with a personality disorder and delusions of grandeur. And you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cage, surrounded by people who will never know or care how smart you think you are. She walked toward the door, then paused. The silence is going to destroy you. Not the bars. Not the guards. The silence. Because there's no audience in prison, Marcus. No one to impress. No one to fool. Just you, alone with yourself, for decades. She opened the door. And eventually, you're going to realize that you're not special at all. You're just another monster who got caught. One of thousands. Forgotten before the trial even ends. She left the room without looking back. Behind her, for the first time since his arrest, Marcus Whitmore had nothing to say. The confession, recorded in its entirety, would form the backbone of the prosecution's case. But the legal battle was far from over. Because Marcus was 14 years old, and the question of whether he could be tried as an adult would become a war fought in courtrooms and in the media, with the fate of justice hanging in the balance. The Hartwell family watched the news of the arrest from their living room, clutching each other in a grief that had finally found a target. Karen wept. David sat in stunned silence. Tyler, who had barely spoken in 3 months, asked a question that no one could answer. Why us? Why Emily? There was no answer. There never would be. Some evil has no explanation. Some questions don't have answers. And some 14-year-old boys are simply born wrong. The question that consumed Cedar Rapids in the weeks following Marcus Whitmore's arrest was both simple and impossibly complex. What do you do with a monster who hasn't finished growing? The law, it turns out, doesn't have a clean answer. It offers frameworks and precedents and judicial discretion, but it doesn't offer certainty. And in the case of a 14-year-old boy who had committed crimes of almost incomprehensible premeditation and cruelty, the legal system was forced to confront its own limitations. Marcus Whitmore had committed an adult crime. But he was not an adult. And the distance between those two facts would become the battleground for a trial that gripped the nation. The first hearing took place on January 28, 2019, 2 weeks after Marcus's arrest. The purpose was to determine whether Marcus would be tried as a juvenile or an adult. In Iowa, this decision rested on a process called waiver, where a juvenile court judge evaluated whether the child in question was amenable to rehabilitation within the juvenile system, or whether the nature of the crime and the characteristics of the offender required the full weight of adult prosecution. The courtroom was packed. Reporters occupied every available seat. Camera crews lined up outside, their lenses tracking anyone who entered or exited. The story had gone national. A 14-year-old killer who had taunted his victim's family was irresistible to a media landscape hungry for spectacle. Marcus was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, his ankles chained. He looked smaller than anyone expected. Younger. The gap between his physical appearance and the crimes he'd committed created a cognitive dissonance that unsettled everyone who saw him. He didn't look like a monster. That was the problem. He looked like someone's son. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Robert Keller, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for methodical, relentless case-building. Keller had prosecuted gang murders, domestic homicides, and drug-related killings, but he would later tell colleagues that the Whitmore case was the most disturbing of his career. "It wasn't the crime itself," he explained. "I've seen worse violence. It was the complete absence of humanity. Sitting across from that kid, listening to him talk about what he did, it was like looking into a void." Keller's argument for adult prosecution was straightforward but devastating. He presented the evidence of premeditation, 3 months of planning, research into forensic countermeasures, the careful selection of location and timing. He presented the journal entries, which documented not just the murder but the psychological framework behind it. The narcissism, the contempt for human life, the explicit statements of superiority. He presented the taunting campaign, the messages to the police, the letters to the Hartwell family, the calculated cruelty designed to maximize suffering. He presented the video Marcus had recorded at the memorial, showing Karen Hartwell's grief played and replayed for his personal satisfaction. And he presented the expert testimony. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a forensic psychologist with 30 years of experience evaluating juvenile offenders, took the stand on the third day of the hearing. Her assessment of Marcus was clinical, thorough, and ultimately damning. Marcus Whitmore displays all the hallmarks of antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic features, she testified. He demonstrates a profound lack of empathy, an inability to form genuine emotional connections, and a grandiose sense of self-importance that requires constant external validation. The defense attorney, Susan Chen, who had been assigned the case and had spent weeks preparing despite knowing she faced an almost impossible task, interrupted. "Dr. Vance, isn't it true that personality disorders cannot be formally diagnosed in minors? That the brain is still developing until at least age 25? "That's correct," Dr. Vance acknowledged. "A formal diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder requires the individual to be at least 18. However, Marcus displays what we call conduct disorder with callous and unemotional traits, which is the adolescent precursor to antisocial personality disorder. The traits are already fixed. The patterns are already established. But isn't there a possibility of rehabilitation? Of treatment that could address these patterns before they become permanent?" Dr. Vance was quiet for a moment before answering. "In my professional opinion, based on extensive interviews with Marcus and a thorough review of his history, no. I don't believe rehabilitation is possible in this case. Marcus doesn't view his actions as wrong. He views them as successful. He's not remorseful, he's frustrated that he was caught. That mindset is extraordinarily resistant to therapeutic intervention." She paused, her voice softening slightly. "I don't say this lightly. I've spent my career advocating for the rehabilitation of juvenile offenders. I believe deeply in the capacity of young people to change. But Marcus Whitmore is not a young person who made a terrible mistake. He is a predator who will, if given the opportunity, offend again. The only question is when, and who the victim will be." The defense's case rested on Marcus's age and the fundamental principles of juvenile justice. Susan Chen was not unsympathetic to the prosecution's evidence. Privately, she found Marcus as disturbing as everyone else did. But she believed in the legal system, believed that even the most heinous offenders deserved vigorous representation, and believed that trying a 14-year-old as an adult set a dangerous precedent. Marcus Whitmore is a child, she argued in her closing statement. His brain is not fully developed. His decision-making capacity is not equivalent to an adult's. The entire foundation of juvenile justice rests on the recognition that children are different, that they are more capable of change, more amenable to intervention, more deserving of a second chance. She paced before the judge, her voice measured but passionate. The prosecution wants you to look at the crime and ignore the criminal. They want you to see the monster and forget the child. But that's not how justice works. If we abandon the principle that children can be rehabilitated, if we decide that some 14-year-olds are simply irredeemable, then we abandon the very foundation of a system designed to recognize that young people are works in progress, not finished products. She stopped, facing the judge directly. I'm not asking you to release Marcus Whitmore. I'm not asking you to minimize what he did. I'm asking you to recognize that trying a child as an adult is a decision that cannot be undone, and that the juvenile system, with its focus on treatment and rehabilitation, offers a better path forward than condemning a 14-year-old to decades in an adult prison. It was a compelling argument. It wasn't enough. Judge Patricia Morrison delivered her ruling on February 8, 2019. The courtroom was silent as she spoke, every word carrying the weight of a decision that would determine the course of Marcus Whitmore's life. I have reviewed the evidence extensively, she began. I have considered the arguments of both the prosecution and the defense. I have studied the psychiatric evaluations and the expert testimony. And I have wrestled with the fundamental question this case presents. Can a 14-year-old be held to adult standards of accountability? She paused, her eyes moving to Marcus, who sat expressionless at the defense table. The answer, in this case, must be yes. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Karen Hartwell, seated in the front row, gripped her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. The crimes Marcus Whitmore committed were not impulsive acts of adolescent poor judgment. They were calculated, premeditated, and executed with a level of sophistication that belies his age. The subsequent campaign of psychological torture against the victim's family demonstrated not momentary cruelty, but sustained, deliberate malice. And the defendant's own statements, his lack of remorse, his pride in his actions, his explicit contempt for human life, indicate a fixed pattern of thinking that is unlikely to respond to juvenile intervention. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes, a rare display of human weariness in the formal setting. I take no pleasure in this ruling. Trying a child as an adult is a decision I approach with profound reluctance. But the juvenile justice system is designed for young people who have the capacity for change. Marcus Whitmore, by every measure available to this court, does not. The waiver is granted. Marcus Whitmore will be tried as an adult for the first-degree murder of Emily Hartwell. The trial itself began on April 15, 2019, exactly 6 months after Emily's death. The prosecution built its case methodically, brick by brick. The physical evidence, the journal entries, the linguistic analysis of the taunting messages, the Facebook page data, the video from the memorial, and most devastating of all, Marcus's own recorded confession, his proud, detailed account of how he had planned and executed the perfect crime. The jury, 12 citizens of Lynn County, selected after an exhaustive voir dire process designed to find people who hadn't already formed opinions about the case, watched the confession video in complete silence. Several wept. One asked to be excused to compose herself. Marcus, seated at the defense table, watched himself on the screen with an expression that observers would later describe as almost nostalgic, as if he were watching home movies from a cherished vacation. Susan Chen mounted the best defense she could. She emphasized Marcus's age, his lack of prior criminal history, the possibility that mental illness had impaired his judgment. She brought in a psychiatrist who argued that Marcus's conduct disorder might respond to intensive treatment in a secure facility. But the confession video made everything else irrelevant. Do you know how hard it is to do what I did? Marcus's recorded voice echoed through the courtroom. I am evolution. I am the future. The jury didn't need to hear anything else. On April 28, Marcus Whitmore took the stand in his own defense. It was a decision Susan Chan had argued against, vehemently, repeatedly, right up until the moment Marcus overruled her. He wanted to testify. He needed to testify. The thought of the trial concluding without him having his say was intolerable. That need would be his final undoing. Under direct examination, Marcus was composed, polished. He expressed regret, not convincingly, but in the carefully constructed sentences Susan had helped him prepare. He spoke about his difficult childhood, his struggles with social connection, his desperate need for acceptance that had somehow twisted into violence. It was a performance. Everyone in the courtroom knew it. But performances can still be effective. Then came the cross-examination. Robert Keller approached the witness stand slowly, deliberately, like a surgeon selecting his instruments. "Marcus," he began, "you've told this jury that you regret what happened to Emily Hartwell. Is that correct?" "Yes." "You feel remorse for her death?" "Yes. I understand now that what I did was wrong." Keller nodded, as if accepting this statement at face value. Then he picked up a remote control from the prosecution table and pointed it at the courtroom's video screen. "I'd like to play something for you, Marcus. This is the video you recorded on your phone during the Hartwell family's memorial gathering. The one you attended 3 weeks after murdering their daughter." The video began. The screen showed the interior of the Hartwell home, the photos of Emily, the grieving guests, the flowers and candles. And then Karen Hartwell appeared, her face hollow with grief, her hands trembling as she accepted condolences from a line of mourners. "This is the video you recorded secretly," Keller continued. "The one our forensic analysts found on your phone. The one you had watched, according to the metadata, 47 times between December 20th and your arrest." He paused the video on a frame showing Karen's tear-streaked face in close-up. 47 times. Marcus. Can you explain why you watched this video 47 times? Marcus's composure flickered. His eyes darted to his attorney, then back to the prosecutor. I don't remember watching it that many times." "You don't remember? But you do remember recording it? While standing in the home of the girl you murdered, shaking her mother's hand, telling her you were praying for the family?" "I was confused. I was trying to understand what I'd done." "You were trying to understand?" Keller's voice hardened. "Let me read you an entry from your journal, dated December 21st, the day after you recorded this video." He picked up a printed page from the prosecution table. "I stood in their house. I touched her hand. I recorded everything. I am standing in the center of their tragedy, and they are thanking me. This feeling, this is what it means to be alive. This is what it means to be God." Keller set down the page and looked directly at Marcus. "Does that sound like someone trying to understand what they'd done? Or does it sound like someone enjoying it?" Marcus didn't answer. For the first time since the trial began, his mask had slipped completely. His face was flushed. His hands were clenched. The grandiose confidence that had defined him was crumbling in real time. "You don't feel remorse, do you, Marcus?" Keller pressed. "You never have. You feel frustrated that you got caught. You feel angry that people don't appreciate how clever you were. But remorse? Guilt? Empathy for Emily or her family?" He shook his head slowly. "You don't feel any of that. Because you can't. Because whatever is broken inside you has always been broken, and no amount of performance is going to convince this jury otherwise." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, to argue, to defend himself, to reassert his superiority, but no words came out. He looked around the courtroom, at the jury watching him with undisguised horror, at his mother weeping silently in the gallery, at the Hartwell family sitting together in the front row. For just a moment, something that might have been fear crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold, flat expression that had always lurked beneath his mask. "I have no more questions," Keller said. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 47 minutes. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Tampering with evidence. harassment, stalking. Marcus Whitmore showed no reaction when the verdict was read. He simply stared straight ahead, his face empty, his eyes fixed on nothing. His mother sobbed. The Hartwells held each other and wept, tears of grief, of relief, of something that wasn't quite closure but was as close as they would ever get. And somewhere in the back of the courtroom, Detective Maria Castellanos allowed herself a small, quiet nod. Justice, incomplete, imperfect, but real, had been served. Sentencing took place on May 15, 2019. 7 months to the day since Emily Hartwell had walked out of her friend's house and into the darkness. 7 months of investigation, of taunting messages, of a community torn apart and slowly, painfully stitching itself back together. 7 months that had transformed the Hartwell family from ordinary people living ordinary lives into survivors of an extraordinary tragedy. The courtroom was full again. The same reporters who had covered the arrest, the hearings, the trial, they were all here for the final act. But the atmosphere was different now. Quieter. The spectacle had faded, replaced by something heavier. The weight of finality. Marcus Whitmore was led in wearing the same orange jumpsuit he'd worn throughout the trial. His wrists were shackled. His ankles were chained. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning the gallery with an expression that observers would later struggle to describe. Not fear. Not remorse. Something closer to assessment. As if he were still calculating angles, still searching for an advantage, still convinced that some opportunity for escape or manipulation might present itself. It wouldn't. Before the judge pronounced sentence, the victims were given the opportunity to speak. Victim impact statements are a peculiar feature of the American justice system. They serve no strictly legal purpose. The verdict has been rendered, the sentence has been determined within statutory guidelines, and nothing a grieving family says will change the outcome. But they serve a human purpose. They give voice to the voiceless. They force the perpetrator to sit in silence while the people they've destroyed describe, in their own words, exactly what has been lost. David Hartwell spoke first. He approached the podium slowly, a folded piece of paper clutched in his hands. He was 51 years old, but he looked a decade older. His hair had grayed noticeably since October, and his shoulders carried a permanent slump that hadn't been there before. He unfolded the paper, stared at it for a long moment, then set it aside. "I had a speech prepared," he said, his voice rough. "I spent 3 days writing it. But standing here now, looking at the person who killed my daughter, the words don't seem adequate." He turned slightly, not quite looking at Marcus, but acknowledging his presence. "You took Emily from us. Not in a moment of anger. Not because of some terrible accident. You planned it. You studied her. You waited for the right moment. And then you took her life like it was nothing, like she was nothing, and you went home and ate dinner with your mother." His voice cracked. He paused, breathing deeply, fighting for composure. "But that wasn't enough for you, was it? You had to come to our house. You had to shake my wife's hand. You had to send us letters describing how our daughter begged for her life. You wanted us to suffer, not just once, but over and over, for months." He shook his head slowly. "I don't understand you. I've tried. I've read books about psychology, about personality disorders, about what makes someone capable of doing what you did. But I don't understand. And I don't think I ever will." He finally looked directly at Marcus. "My daughter was kind. She was generous. She had her whole life ahead of her. College, a career, maybe a family of her own someday. You took all of that. Not because she did anything to you. Not because she hurt you or threatened you or wronged you in any way. Because she didn't want to sit next to you at a school assembly." His voice hardened. "That's what her life was worth to you. A moment of embarrassment. A tiny wound to your ego. And for that, you destroyed her. You destroyed us. You destroyed everything." He gathered his papers with trembling hands. "I hope you spend every day of the rest of your life in a cell. I hope you grow old surrounded by concrete and steel and the knowledge of what you are. And I hope," his voice broke completely, tears streaming down his face, "I hope that somewhere in that emptiness you call a soul, you eventually understand what you took from us. Because Emily deserved to be understood. Even if you're incapable of understanding her, maybe someday you'll understand what her absence means. He returned to his seat without looking back. Karen gripped his hand as he sat down, both of them shaking with grief that would never fully heal. Karen Hartwell spoke next. She moved to the podium with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural, the careful, deliberate movements of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. In her hands, she carried a single photograph, Emily at 15, grinning at the camera, a shelter dog in her arms. She placed the photograph on the podium, facing the courtroom. "This is my daughter," she said. "Not a victim. Not a case number. Not a story on the news. My daughter. Emily Marie Hartwell. The girl who sang off-key to shelter dogs. The girl who stayed after school to help freshmen with homework. The girl who visited her grandmother every Sunday and actually listened to her stories." Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened with tears that she refused to let fall. "You thought you knew her, Marcus. You watched her. You studied her. You wrote about her in your journal. But you didn't know anything about her. You saw a target, an object, something to be possessed or destroyed. You never saw Emily." She picked up the photograph and held it toward the defense table. "This is who she was. This smile. This joy. This beautiful girl who had so much love to give that she spent her free time caring for animals nobody else wanted. You looked at her and saw something to be controlled. She looked at the world and saw something to be cherished." Karen's composure finally cracked. Her voice trembled as she continued. "You came to my house. Did you know that? I didn't realize it until after your arrest. I went back through my memories of those awful weeks, and I remembered a boy, a polite boy who offered condolences and said he was praying for us. That was you. You stood in my living room, surrounded by Emily's photographs, and you shook my hand and lied to my face." A sob escaped her throat. She pressed on. "I thanked you. I thanked the person who murdered my daughter. I think about that every day. I think about your hand in mine. I think about your eyes looking into my eyes. And I feel sick. I feel violated in a way I can't even describe." She lowered the photograph, clutching it to her chest. "You wanted us to know how clever you were. That's why you sent the messages. That's why you came to our home. You needed an audience for your cruelty. Well, here's what I want you to know, Marcus." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "You're not clever. You're not special. You're not the genius you think you are. You're a sad, broken, pathetic child who killed a girl because she didn't want to sit next to you. That's your legacy. That's what the world will remember about you. Not your intelligence. Not your planning. Just the smallness of your ego and the emptiness of your soul." She straightened up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Emily would have felt sorry for you. That's the kind of person she was. She would have seen the loneliness behind your mask and tried to help you. But I'm not Emily. I'm her mother. And I will never forgive you. I will never understand you. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that people remember my daughter, not as a victim, but as the bright, beautiful girl you had no right to take from us." She stepped back from the podium. "That's all I have to say." Tyler Hartwell did not give a statement. He sat between his parents, now 13 years old, a boy who had aged far beyond his years in the months since his sister's death. He had written something. Karen had seen him working on it late at night, scribbling and crossing out and starting over, but in the end, he couldn't bring himself to speak. Instead, he simply looked at Marcus. A long, steady look from across the courtroom. A look that carried everything he couldn't put into words: the confusion, the rage, the grief, the permanent alteration of his understanding of the world. Marcus met his gaze for a moment, then looked away. It was the only time during the entire proceedings that Marcus Whitmore appeared uncomfortable. Judge Patricia Morrison delivered the sentence at 3:47 p.m. "Marcus Whitmore," she began, "you have been found guilty of murder in the first degree, along with related charges of evidence tampering, harassment, and stalking. Before I pronounce sentence, I want to address you directly." She paused, her eyes fixed on the defendant. "In my years on this bench, I have sentenced many people for terrible crimes. I have seen violence born of rage, of desperation, of addiction, of mental illness. I have seen defendants who wept with genuine remorse and defendants who showed no emotion at all. But I have never encountered a defendant quite like you." Her voice was measured but carried an undercurrent of something that might have been anger. "The premeditation of your crime was extraordinary. The cruelty of your subsequent conduct was almost incomprehensible. And your complete lack of remorse, your evident pride in what you did, suggests a fundamental absence of humanity that I frankly struggle to understand." She glanced at her notes, then back at Marcus. "You are 14 years old. The law requires me to consider your age, your potential for rehabilitation, and the appropriate balance between punishment and the protection of society. I have considered all of these factors carefully." She straightened in her chair. "For the charge of murder in the first degree, I sentence you to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Karen Hartwell closed her eyes. "For the related charges, I sentence you to an additional 5 years, to be served consecutively." Judge Morrison removed her glasses and set them on the bench. "You will be eligible for parole consideration when you are 44 years old. Whether you ever leave prison will depend on whether you can demonstrate genuine rehabilitation, something I honestly doubt you are capable of. But the possibility exists, as the law requires for juvenile offenders." She leaned forward. "I want you to understand something, Mr. Whitmore. You have described yourself as superior, exceptional, beyond the understanding of ordinary people. But there is nothing exceptional about what you did. You killed a defenseless girl because your ego couldn't tolerate a minor rejection. You tormented her family because you craved attention. You are not a genius who operated above the law. You are a deeply disturbed young man who committed a senseless act of violence and then couldn't resist bragging about it until you handed investigators everything they needed to convict you." She shook her head slowly. "You will have decades to contemplate that reality. Decades of silence. Decades without an audience. Decades to discover whether the grandiose self-image you've constructed can survive without anyone to perform for." She picked up her gavel. "This court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Marcus Whitmore was led away in chains, disappearing through a side door into the custody of the Iowa Department of Corrections. He did not look back. Afterward, the Hartwell family stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters and cameras and microphones thrust toward their faces. David had prepared a statement, but he couldn't bring himself to read it. Instead, Karen stepped forward. "We want to thank the Cedar Rapids community for their support during the worst months of our lives," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We want to thank Detective Castellanos, Detective Brennan, and the entire police department for their tireless work. And we want to thank everyone who knew and loved Emily, who shared their memories with us, who kept her spirit alive during the darkest days." She paused, swallowing hard. "This verdict doesn't bring Emily back. Nothing will. But it means that the person who took her will be held accountable. It means that justice, imperfect, incomplete, but real, has been served." She looked directly into the cameras. "We will never forget our daughter. We will never stop loving her. And we will spend the rest of our lives honoring her memory, not as a victim, but as the beautiful, kind, generous person she was. Emily deserved better than what happened to her. We will make sure the world remembers who she truly was." She turned away from the microphones, and the family walked together toward their car, leaving the courthouse behind. And Marcus Whitmore? He was transported that evening to a juvenile detention facility where he would remain until his 18th birthday. Then he would be transferred to the Iowa State Penitentiary in Fort Madison, where he would begin serving his adult sentence. The facility was quiet, institutional, utterly devoid of the audience he craved. Marcus lay on his narrow bunk that first night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the facility around him. Doors clanging, guards making rounds, other inmates shouting or weeping in the distance. The silence between those sounds was vast, suffocating. He thought about the trial, about the verdict, about the judge's words. Decades of silence, decades without an audience. For the first time in his life, Marcus Whitmore felt something he didn't have a name for. Not guilt, he remained incapable of that. Not remorse. Something else. Something cold and creeping that settled in his chest and made it difficult to breathe. It might have been the first stirrings of genuine fear. Or it might have been the dawning recognition that the game he'd played so confidently was finally, irrevocably over. He had spent his whole life believing he was the smartest person in any room. Now he would spend the rest of it alone in rooms where no one cared. There's a certain kind of justice in that. Not the dramatic kind we see in movies. Not the righteous confrontation or the satisfying moment of defeat. Just the quiet, grinding reality of consequence. Marcus Whitmore wanted to be remembered as a genius. He'll be remembered as a cautionary tale. He wanted to play God. He'll spend his life in a cage. He wanted the world to know how special he was. The world has already moved on. And Emily Hartwell, the girl who sang off-key to shelter dogs, who helped struggling freshmen with their homework, who visited her grandmother every Sunday, will be remembered for exactly what she was. Not a victim. A light that was extinguished too soon. A daughter. A sister. A friend. A person who mattered. I promised you a story about justice, and I've delivered it. But justice isn't an ending. It's a checkpoint. The Hartwells will carry their grief forever. The community will carry its scars. And somewhere in a prison cell, a young man who believed he was untouchable is discovering what it means to be forgotten. If this story has moved you, if Emily's memory deserves to be carried forward, I want to ask you to do one final thing. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Not because it's entertaining, but because it matters. Because every time we tell the story of someone like Emily, we keep a small part of her alive. And every time we examine the psychology of someone like Marcus, we become a little better at recognizing the warning signs before it's too late. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about a girl named Emily Hartwell, who deserved so much more than the ending she received. Until next time.